Okay, so here we are. Welcome to our electronic 2022 plan and budget public input meeting on December 8th of 2021. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, Regional Council is practicing physical distance and everyone is participating electronically. Regional Chair Redmond and myself are in council chambers. I would like to acknowledge the land on which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, their contributions to our community. I look to our clerk for the roll call, please.
Thank you. Chair Redmond.
Present.
Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Erb. Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Councillor Jowett.
Here.
Councillor Kiefer.
Present.
Councillor McGarry.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Present.
Councillor Strickland.
Here.
Councillor Verbanovic.
Present.
And regrets from Councillor Rentz. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Short. I now look to the Zoom room for any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none, I will look to speak to the delegations before we commence the program this evening. I want to start by thanking all the delegations who have come to tonight's final public input meeting for the 2022 budget. Your presentations and perspectives are valued. Please don't feel offended if you don't get any questions from councillors. We will be taking notes. We have also received written correspondence and input through a number of different channels which we factor into our decision making. A quick reminder for myself and my colleagues before we commence. Tonight's public input meeting is not a councillor input meeting. In order to keep the meeting moving, if you have questions for a delegation, please make it brief and limit yourself to one question and one follow-up question. Any questions asked should be to the delegates and should be questions of clarification rather than debating a delegate. This is one of the several important opportunities for us to hear from our community. Delegations are allotted 5 minutes to speak. Groups have been allotted with 10 minutes, and anyone that registered after the deadline has 3 minutes. There is a timer which will appear to council and participants in the council chamber window. I will provide the 1 minute reminder when your time is nearing completion. If you are watching this meeting via our live webcast and you would like to speak tonight, you can contact the regional clerk at regionalclerk@regionofwaterloo.ca, all lowercase, all one word. And you will be called at the end of the meeting. Anyone who registers during the meeting will be allotted 3 minutes to speak. I would now like to remind all delegations of some guidance for participation in tonight's meeting. Please leave your video and camera turned off and your microphone and audio muted until you're called upon to speak. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in immediate removal from the meeting. Interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations. Derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others. Turning your camera on at inappropriate times, and hate speech or defamatory comments. I will now call upon the delegations as listed in the agenda. We have over 30 delegations tonight, so I'll be calling for a short break after the 18th delegation. Delegation number 1 is Judah Woodstorn. I hope I've said that properly. Judah, are you there?
I'm here, yes. And that was close enough. That was good.
Welcome. Please begin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good evening, Chair Redmond and Council. As I'm sharing my screen here at the same time, I have a little bit of a slideshow prepared for you in my 5 minutes as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. The main message that I want to convey to all of you is that it's my hope that you will vote no to the police budget. And I have 5 quick points that I would like to make in relation to that. Number 1, policing is harmful. Systemic racism is a core feature of our policing system, including the Waterloo Regional Police Service. Secondly, policing is ineffective. It doesn't actually prevent crime, and in fact, the language that we use to describe it in my world, in the academic world, is that it's criminogenic. That means it's crime-causing, and I'll say more about that in a minute. Number 3, policing is wasteful. It's one of the most expensive options that we can use to respond to calls for service in our community. And number 4, policing is unnecessary. There's other services that can do a lot of the tasks of policing much cheaper and much better. And then finally, policing is a fear-based community or fear-based punitive response. And what we need in this community in Waterloo region is a reallocation into other services that provide love and care. So number 1, policing is harmful. I wish I could simply pause here and say to you that systemic racism, again, is a core feature of policing within the Waterloo Regional Police Service. I came and made a similar point last year at budget time, and I was steered in the direction of the Police Services Board. Council told me that you couldn't reallocate, but I should go talk to the Police Services Board. Well, I went and talked to the Police Services Board, and guess what they said to me? They said, go talk to council because we can't reallocate. So I'm back here once again talking to you about systemic racism in policing. One of the best examples of that, also a sad example, is the student resource officer programs. I've studied closely all of the student resource officers reviews across the country. Waterloo region is not unique. The public board voted to remove police officers from schools because of the impact of systemic racism. Indigenous, Black, and racialized students couldn't learn because of having police in our schools. And so I've left a couple quotes that you can see there on the screen as well too. So policing is harmful. And this is the same message that's also in the letter that I hope you're going to take a close look at from our sitting Kitchener MP and Kitchener Centre MPP, who have come together to also make this main argument about why we need to invest no further in policing and reallocate that ask for an increase in the police budget. Next, policing is ineffective. So my own work and research has been in and around prisons. I've worked with adults in federal prison systems for close to 20 years. And one of the things that I've learned over time is most of those adults started coming in conflict with the law when they were young people. And the thought that I have in my head is, why am I meeting them later in life as adults? Shouldn't we have interrupted that at some point in time? And so I've written in a number of places about this topic, but in fact, intervention by the criminal justice system increases the likelihood for future criminal justice system involvement by a factor of 7. And so we see then the criminogenic nature or the crime causing nature. And there's a lot of reasons for that. If you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer that. I do remember one conversation that I had though with a Waterloo Regional Police officer from the break and enter unit who talked about this quote when it comes to prisons. And I hope you've had a chance to read it. Next, policing is wasteful. So the police are asking for a 12.4 million budget increase. There was an excellent editorial in the Record this past week where an emeritus professor who is a housing first specialist said, well, we can purchase 35 more police officers, or guess what else we could do? For $11 million, we can actually use a housing first option to house 500 people. And I'm sure you're paying attention to this issue because homelessness is on the rise in our communities. And we know that
That's the 1 minute warning, Judah.
Thank you. Thank you. Close to 500 people are sleeping rough in our community at this moment. So instead of 35 police officers, we could house every single one of those people. Next, policing is unnecessary. So Statistics Canada tells us that 50 to 80% of all police calls are non-criminal in nature. If you look at the WRPS data, you'll know that 20% of calls for service are mental health related, welfare checks, or addiction. So all of that then points us in the direction of reallocation because there's other services that can do what policing are doing, but do it better. And so that's why I would encourage you to vote no to the police budget, to think about how to use that $12 million in other community-based supports, housing and homelessness, and Indigenous Community Hub, because I really want us to be a community that doesn't live in fear, and policing is a fear-based system. I really want a loving, caring Waterloo region. And so please, once again, vote no to the police budget.
All right, okay, thank you. Looking for any questions, comments? Okay. And our next delegation is Kelly Smith. Are you there, Kelly?
I am.
Hi, welcome. Please begin.
Thank you. I am very pleased to come before Regional Council tonight. The Friends of Waterloo Region Museums is a charitable foundation that raises funds primarily in support of concealing Waterloo Region Museum and Dune Heritage Village. The history of our Friends group began in 1956 when Dune Pioneer Village, which you might have visited as children, was first built at the Huron Road and Homer Watson Boulevard site. We have been involved in the museum for 65 years, and we've enjoyed a long relationship with the region during most of those years, donating over $367,000 since 1998. The funds that we donate to the Cancealing Waterloo Region Museum and Dune Heritage Village enhance what the region is able to provide through the operating, staffing, and capital budgets. This year, for example, one of our donations paid for new lanterns for use throughout the village during the evening events. As members of the Waterloo Region community, we are very aware of the crucial work that the region has had to urgently undertake this past 2 years, particularly leading public health and other emergency and essential services. During this time, many of the Waterloo Region Museum staff were redeployed from the museums to work with the COVID-19 vaccine mobilization. The Friends have been very, very proud of our staff for sharing in this important effort. There has been an impact, however, at the museums with shorter hours to the public, cancellation of events, loss of staff, and student internships that have certainly been felt. And like many other organizations, most of our fundraising events were necessarily canceled or delayed as a result of the pandemic. We know that in the coming years really, the region must walk a financial tightrope between recovering from the pandemic emergency while also building a vibrant and growing community where people want to live and work and play and businesses want to thrive. The Waterloo Region Museums are crucial to telling the stories of our region to our residents, those who have been here for life, those who are new to our region, and also to draw others to come here. Today, what we really just wanted you to know was that although our fundraising has certainly taken a hit like so many other nonprofits during the pandemic, we have continued to actively support the museum as best we can. We have a full board of 12 people with diverse skill sets, and over the next year, we are planning a mix of fundraising events, workshops, gift shop sales, recognition of our volunteers, and virtual programming. Our on-site fundraising resumed this month with a painting workshop, and tickets are still on sale for our festive nights, which is our Christmas celebration by lantern light at Cancealing Waterloo Region Museum and Dune Heritage Village. This year, one of our major strategies is to seek corporate sponsorships and partnerships, and we've recently gratefully received 2 new sponsorships. And we will be recognizing through social media, and we're continuing to build that area of our community partnership. We've just committed to a donation of another $5,000 for costuming to Cancealing Waterloo Region Museum to help with costuming needs, and that'll pay for 1914 winter hats for staff and volunteers, I do believe. So that check is on its way. And we would just urge the region's continued financial stewardship of our museums, which we believe are really jewels of this community that will help Waterloo Region to thrive post-pandemic. And we thank you for this opportunity and for always your continued support.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. I see no questions or comments, so thank you. And we are looking to our next delegation. Saleem, Debs. Selam. I'm sorry, I hope I've said that properly. Selam.
That's okay. Yep, it is Selam.
Wonderful. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. I want to start by rooting in the awareness that I live and work on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, and that we are situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to 6 nations, which includes, of course, 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. And the truth is that we are in stolen land that belongs to Indigenous peoples and has been exploited and extracted by white colonizers in the colonial experiment of stealing, annihilation, assimilation, and the continued subjugation of Indigenous peoples, the enslavement of Black people for 250 years, and the ongoing impacts of systemic racism in every system, including the system we are navigating this evening. I thought about what I could share this evening with you, Regional Council, and I thought maybe I could share statistics and data on the impacts of how policing has traumatized the Black communities that I grew up in, as Jude did so wonderfully. But that he did so wonderfully. But we are fortunate that we have so many activists and academics, organizers, and community voices that have shared so much of this information and data with you and will continue to, I'm sure, this evening. I actually don't need to read one article to understand the impacts of the violence our communities experience with policing. Growing up in Black and Brown disinvested communities almost my entire life, I have watched and experienced firsthand the violence and abuse we face in communities. Children surveilled from a young age, eventually pushed into the school to prison pipeline. Myself and my loved ones constantly treated as inherently criminal while we lived in fear in our communities because of the constant police presence. I remember the day that I was taking the last bus home from college when my partner and I were thrown off the city bus with extreme force while police threw me face down on a cop car and handcuffed me while I watched in anguish as they threw my Black partner to the ground, face down with 5 police officers' knees in his back. A community friend came off the bus and told the officers that he would report this. And so they said that they would let me go, but that they were taking my partner to jail for intoxication. He wasn't intoxicated. They made that up. We did nothing wrong, and that changed our lives forever. Policing is traumatizing to Black communities. The time that my apartment on Hugo Street in Kitchener was robbed, and I had no other choice but to call the police. And when they finally arrived after many hours, they told me that there was nothing that they could do because this is what happens when you live in this type of community, they said. Policing doesn't prevent crime. When I experienced intimate partner violence and had no other choice but to call the police multiple times in hopes to protect me and my son, they told me again and again that there was nothing that they could do, that, quote, he hasn't done enough for us to deem it as violence. Policing does not have the tools and framework to support the complexities and trauma of intimate partner violence. They were waiting for me to be, bruised, beaten, bloody, and possibly even dead. I have too many stories that I could share, but I will not indulge in trauma porn with all of you because it should not take hearing the trauma of our stories for you to listen. Pause and believe this community. My stories are not unique. This is the status quo experience for Black, Indigenous, racialized, 2S LGBTQ+, unhoused, and communities most disenfranchised. If you have dramatically different experiences with police, meaning all of you, Regional Council, start to ask yourself why. If you had the experience of feeling protected, maybe, and safe by police throughout your life, does that mean that you will use your own lens to make this decision? Or will you prioritize the most targeted and vulnerable community members? It has never been safe for me to call the police. The police have never protected me from harm. My body has never felt safe when the police are around. In fact, my body feels unsafe because I know how many loved ones have experienced the brutality of police violence on their bodies, and I know what it feels like to not know if my interaction with policing could lead to my death.
30 seconds.
I fear daily, thank you. I fear daily for my 16-year-old son as he begins to drive a car and build more autonomy. Are those things that you, Regional Council, are you thinking about that when you think about your children or your grandchildren driving? We do not need more policing. In fact, approving this budget would be unethical. Increasing the police budget would be unethical. You have heard the endless calls to action for community care frameworks. I want to know that if my son has a mental health crisis, that he won't have to call the police, that he won't be met by someone with a weapon who will kill him with impunity, that he will be cared for with a police-free, weapons-free community care service. Waterloo Region deserves better, and the police asking for this type of increase is actually a complete slap in the face to the lived experiences and the voices of this community. I do not know any of your backgrounds, but I'm sitting here looking at an all-white regional council who has deep access to privilege and advantage, who gets to decide on whether or not the most marginalized and disenfranchised community members will be prioritized. That's really scary. That when those who cannot and have not walked in your shoes have this much power and authority on your life, your well-being and access to dignified care.
Wrap up now. You're over your time.
Okay, thank you. So the call to action is to follow what the Reallocate Waterloo Region is asking for and to do better.
Thank you for your comments today. I see no hands up. I'm looking for the next delegation. I believe it's Suhanya, Ketheeswaran. I'm so sorry. I hope I got that.
You were very close, Chair Jowett.
I'm so sorry. Can you tell
That's
me how?
okay.
Can you tell me how to say it, please?
It's Suhania.
Suhanya. Well, welcome, Suhanya. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Jowett and Council, for giving me the opportunity to provide my input into the Region of Waterloo's 2022 budget. As a resident, a mother, and someone who worked in frontline social service roles for several years, what I see with this budget is an opportunity for us to close the gap between what we say is important to us as a community and what we actually spend our money on as a community. In 2021, the average household in Waterloo Region was asked to pay $2,096 in property taxes to cover the cost of regional services. Of that, Council spent $669 on police, while spending less than half of that amount on housing, employment and income support, public health, and children's services combined. When I look back at the region's budget books over the past 4 years, the same spending proportions can be found year after year after year. How does what we spend line up with what we say is important to us as a community? In my humble opinion, it doesn't line up. The Region of Waterloo's strategic plan says the region aspires to be an inclusive, thriving, and sustainable region, not just for some people, but for every single person. A fact sheet prepared by the region's Crime Prevention Council identifies 6 things a community can do to create a healthier community. It includes reducing poverty, providing affordable housing, and investing in comprehensive childhood development. Policing isn't listed as an intervention for community safety and crime prevention. When asked in 2012 and again in 2013 how government funding should be invested when it comes to crime and justice, nearly 60% of the respondents in Waterloo Region wanted governments to place a major emphasis on funding crime prevention strategies, while only 30% indicated that they'd like governments to emphasize policing and law enforcement. Community residents were surveyed and consulted again by the region last summer. The most important social concerns that residents identified were affordable housing, homelessness, unemployment, and mental health. And yet in 2021, we spent 4 times as much on policing than we did on housing, 14 times as much on policing than we did on employment and income supports. And I was unfortunately not able to determine from the budget book exactly how much was spent on mental health. If our spending habits are any indication of our priorities, then the repeated overemphasis on policing and the underinvestment in other services suggests that as a community, we believe that policing is key to healthy communities. But that doesn't line up with what the research says, what the community has been saying, or what the region's own strategic plan has stated. Indeed, the police chief himself, Chief Brian Larkin, has said that his officers are often called to respond to situations they don't have the expertise for, like overdoses and mental health crises, simply because no other service is available to respond 24/7. How could such a service exist if we won't fund it? And what guarantee do we have that increasing resources for policing will help with responses to violent crime when so much of police resources are being diverted to calls and responsibilities that are out of scope for the service? Chief Larkin is also quoted in a City News article from last fall saying, "I do believe that if we can address poverty, housing, and food insecurity, we can also have a long-term impact on crime. But it's not as simple as turning one tap off and turning the other on. It has to be a blended approach." To me and to a growing number of other Waterloo Region residents, the way we spend public money in this community doesn't feel like a blended approach. It feels like an incredibly lopsided approach. I don't know how it came to be that our public dollars are invested so heavily into policing at the expense of more effective strategies for preventing crime and building safe, healthy, and thriving communities. The fact that it's remained this way for so many years tells me that changing course won't be easy. but I believe this council has the power, the courage, and the compassion to do what's necessary. The Reallocate Waterloo Region campaign has outlined some immediate first steps that council can take in closing the gap between what we say is important and how we spend public money in this community. I ask you, council, to act on your power, your courage, and your compassion in incorporating these calls to action into the 2022 budget. Thank you.
Wow, that was very impressive. Well timed. Thank you so much for your comments. I see no questions, so we'll be looking for the next delegation. Lisa O'Connell. Lisa, are you there? There you are. Welcome,
Thank
Lisa.
you very much. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm here tonight to talk about discretionary grants for organizations as recommended by the staff recommendation and why I believe this is critically important for our community. I'm the founding artistic director of Path the Dog Theatre Creation. We are a nationally recognized catalyst for theatre creation for regional Ontario, and I'm also the instigator of the Waterloo Regional Micro Grants. Both of these initiatives don't receive regional funding, but they are nationally recognized and receive funding at other levels. I'd like to speak specifically about the micro grants. We're now in our second year. We are currently midst jury. Next week we'll meet. We've received over 2 years, 176 applications, and we can fund only 35. These are an economic development tool to create a really healthy and really vital ecology for arts in the community. These grants allow to kickstart a project for 1 week, and with our assistance and others, they have successfully been used by last year's micrograntees to leverage for both provincial and federal funding. There are several examples of this, literally dozens, 3 of which I want to point out tonight. One is a new dance company, Dust and Soul Dance, which has been founded by someone who's moved 8 years ago, went to the National Ballet School, and is now programming in our community. One is someone who moved to our community 6 years ago, Virtue Arts, which is the first Black, African, and Caribbean theatre creation company in our region. And another one is a digital visual collective, the Covert Collective, which received a $100,000 allocation from Canada Council's Digital Now program. All of these are new initiatives. All of these represent new ideas, new works, new ways of doing art in our home community with local folks. None of these organizations and individuals will ever be eligible under the current regime for regional funding. I recognize we have a wonderful arts fund, and what's wonderful is that it is woefully underserviced for these new initiatives, as that's project funding and not core funding. We call it one and done in our industry, where you can have something that happens for once, but it's not sustainable from a professional perspective. And I'm here really to skill share with you and to share my expertise and why, unless we move to discretionary grants for organizations and allow staff that availability, these new initiatives will never have the opportunity to grow and be able to provide the kind of proper quality arts and culture community that this community really deserves and should have. I recognize you've got 30 people talking to you tonight, and I recognize your ears are probably bleeding over with everything you need to hear tonight. So if I want to keep it short, but if I could just leave one thought with you, and when you just remember what I've spoken to, please allow our people to be competitive. Please allow new ideas and new initiatives to go forward. Please allow professional workers who are trained in our community to work in our community. And I strongly, firmly believe that can only happen if we make some shifts to how we fund in the region. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well within the time limit, much appreciated. I see no hands up, so I'm looking to find Martin, Asling, and Kevin White, Waterloo Region, yes, in my backyard with regard to affordable housing. Are you there?
I'm here, and Kevin will be speaking later.
Oh dear. Okay. So you have 10 minutes, so please begin.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the chair. Thank you to all of Region for this meeting.
Martin, can I ask you to turn off your camera? Your voice is a little bit choppy, and that might be helpful if it's less. I'm not a technical wizard or anything, but I think it helps with the bandwidth a little.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me better?
Yeah, I think that's better.
Well, as you council recently, last few months.
I'm sorry, Martin, that's not better. Are you able to, is Kevin able to share your points for you? I really apologize, but it's just coming in very choppy.
If I understand delegates, I would, if you'd like to allow them to speak.
Martin, I still can't, we can't really understand. I'm wondering if we have a solution for you. Do you want to write into us? Do you want to write into Regional Council and make sure that we all get, we'll make sure, Clerk's office will make sure we all get a copy? It's just really choppy.
Madam Chair, is there a phone number we can phone in?
Yeah, that sometimes works. It was in the link that Clerk sent to you, Martin. Do you have that phone number? Because you can enter by phone if you like. Martin, are you there? Have we lost you? You still there? So Kevin, are you able to speak more clearly?
I may be able to be heard.
We can hear you perfectly.
But I would strongly urge that Martin's voice is heard. He may be attempting to call in. He has I'm here very much in support of Martin and WREMB this evening. But Martin is the one with the majority of the prepared statement for this evening.
Okay, so why don't we wait and see if he can dial in, and we'll go to another delegation perhaps. Does that make sense in the interest of time?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, thank you for that, Kevin. Then we'll wait to see him getting in, and the staff, our clerk staff will see them coming in. Sam Nabi of Kitchener Reallocation. Are you there, Sam? Wonderful. Okay, Sam, you have 5 minutes. Please commence.
Thank you, Chair Jowett, members of council. My name is Sam Nabi. I want to start by thinking back to some commitments that were made in the last budget process. In last budget, Regional Council approved a faster rollout of the automated speed enforcement program. It was intended to reduce pressure on the police. Has it worked? Have regional transportation staff been able to reduce the need for traffic cops sitting at the side of a road with a radar gun? Well, we don't know. We don't know because the police service hasn't provided department level numbers in their budget requests. We don't know whether the police service is asking for budget increase for traffic enforcement, drug investigations, human trafficking. We just don't know. The information's not there in the public reports that were provided to Police Services Board. What we do know is that this past September, before Regional Council has even seen the budget proposal, the Police Board approved a $2.2 million to buy 48 brand new police vehicles for 2022. Based on their behavior, it really doesn't look like they got the memo. This lack of transparency is only the beginning. When asked to find cost savings in both last year's and this year's budget process, the police have threatened to start charging municipalities for basic services such as running the 911 dispatch. This year, the police chief has also threatened to cancel the collection of race-based data if he doesn't get a big enough budget increase. It's a completely disingenuous and bullying approach. The police service wants unquestioned budget increases year after year, and they want to keep control over everything they touch. Going back to last year's budget, Council approved a motion to advocate for provincial reform on police budgets and governance. I didn't see that happen over the last 10 months. No press releases, no statements on the region's website. What have you all been doing on the advocacy front? Today's agenda includes a joint letter from our Kitchener Centre MP and MPP, not to thank Regional Council for their advocacy over the past year, but to indicate that they felt compelled to share the community's concerns of which you will be hearing a lot of over the course of the evening. Again, going back to last year's budget, we approved $250,000 to design a community safety model led by a police-free coalition. It was a good motion, one that arose out of demands by Black, Indigenous, and racialized leaders in the region, but nothing has come of it yet. We're almost into 2022. and the work on the community safety model has not even begun. Why? Well, because the region wants to wrap up planning the police-led safety and well-being plan first. This police-led model was spurred by the Ontario Ministry of Justice and resulted in the creation of an entirely new department in the police service. So the police-free community safety model languishes, budget unspent, while the police service carries on as usual, taking on more and more responsibility, demanding more and more money, and positioning themselves as the solution to all of our problems. I don't care how many upstream initiatives council commits to or budgets for if we never actually get them done. Again, going back to last year's budget, council approved a $15 million fund for BIPOC initiatives. While we've seen some announcements about how that funding has been distributed, and they seem like great announcements, it's not clear how much has been allocated in total or where we're at in delivering on that promise. In 2022, I'd like to see a budget that recognizes we can't police our way out of every problem. A budget that acts like the housing and homelessness crisis is real. A budget that commits funding to an Indigenous community hub and to a mental health supports for those traumatized by police violence.
1 minute left.
That budget starts with a 0% increase in the police budget. It's hard to believe the police chief claim that the sky is falling when the police service is sitting on many millions in reserves and they've already committed 2.2 million for new vehicles for next year. I'll close with this. I volunteer on a board of an organization that provides supportive and affordable housing. Our staff work hard for low wages to support people with severe mental health and addictions challenges. They are stretched thin, they are burned out, and they are the ones supporting residents through a transition out of homelessness into finding a stable home. Sometimes the police have to get called, and when that happens, it's usually a bad day. But the police don't prevent disaster. They just show up after someone has fallen through all of these other cracks. So let's build more supportive housing units, hire more caseworkers, invest in training, and when those frontline staff need to call for backup, let's have a police-free coalition they can lean on instead of someone in a uniform with a badge and a gun.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. That's time. Much appreciated. And at this particular time, I see no questions. We're going to return to Martin and Kevin, if we can. Martin, are you there? Do you think you're sorted out with that phone number? Is he there? Okay, so we'll keep
Hello?
back. Oh,
Hi.
are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now, Martin. That's much better.
Okay, this should work better even though I do have video because I'm on a different platform.
Okay.
So thank you again to everyone. Thank you to regional staff for all the recent reports they've written. Thank you to you, the chair, and to regional council for giving the community this opportunity to speak, including, of course, ourselves. As you know, we've previously asked regional council to formally allow encampments, along with many other community groups and a growing number of people in the community. More recently, there's been a change.org petition calling for a moratorium on encampment evictions, with currently just over 1,000 signatures, 1,185 to be precise, and that's just in under 1 week. When we previously spoke to council on the subject, we were responding to a series of Waterloo Region staff reports, and the one point that we did take issue with was a suggestion of there being either a housing first approach or allowing encampments, and we believe that allowing encampments recognizes that we haven't fully met the standards of a housing first policy, and it might make it easier for us to move towards it because we have a more cooperative relationship with the community that we really need to be serving. The other part of that, of those staff reports that I thought was incredibly valuable and important, was the evidence that was presented in favor of the housing first model. And just to reiterate, we very much agree with the housing first model, and we think that the evidence was very convincing, and particularly with the more recent iteration, which was the point in time count as well. That, as you know, found that over 1,000 people in our region are currently homeless, and we had many delegations such as Marie Morrison's delegation, which further elaborated on that point. So yeah, just to reiterate, there is a strong case for housing first, for putting those resources into housing people without preconditions. But we haven't invested yet to say that we have a housing first policy. We certainly have some very good housing first programs. And the point of time count is the best evidence that we haven't quite reached that goal yet. More broadly in support of the case for housing first, we of course refer to the evidence that has already been presented to you, but I'd just like to make a couple other points as well. First of all, when people talk about the costs of homelessness, this is often understood as the costs in taxes from emergency shelters, emergency medical support, and other things that address the symptoms of homelessness, and which studies show are much less relied upon when people are housed and their basic needs are met. These studies, such as the at-home study in Canada, they don't and can't possibly, and I'm not faulting them for this, it's a matter of what you can and cannot quantify, but they don't capture all the benefits of housing people under the housing first model. They don't capture in monetary terms the hope, sense of dignity and security that comes from having a secure roof over your head. So even though all of the benefits cannot be measured, the easily quantifiable benefits, and those are the benefits that we're really looking at when we talk about the benefits in these types of studies, even those benefits show that they either pay for their costs and taxes or come very close to doing so. So we believe that the true barrier really is ultimately political will. To use one example, the at-home study, which was a very kind of famous study funded by the federal government in many different Canadian cities. So that study actually compares housing first to treatment as usual. It would be actually rather unethical if they did kind of similar to a randomized control trial where they made a point for the sake of a study to not help people that are homeless at all, and then help the other group. So the control group didn't get nothing at all. So that anything underestimates the impact of actually putting all of those investments in towards helping people that are homeless. I hope that point is clear, because if you're living in an encampment, certainly you are still connected to the community, hopefully, but certainly not even to the extent to which the treatment as usual control group may have even been. So the benefits, if anything, are underestimated. I would also add that there was a UCLA economist named Elior Cohen who did kind of a much more conservative study, but still, while looking at many of the methodological challenges that a social scientist might find, he again found the same type of impact where for him, and again, these are just measurable benefits, measurable in monetary terms benefits. He was able to find a very simple cost benefit analysis where up to 80% of housing costs are offset by these potential benefits in the first 18 months alone. And these are the types of things that you can measure, which are usually savings to other levels of government, because the other types of benefits, the one thing that people might want to look at, but it's hasn't been done as much, as looking at the extent to which other people really want to see homelessness end. And how would you measure, the degree to which they want that? How would you measure the greater sense of hope that people that are homeless themselves have when they find a home? So even under some pretty conservative, by necessity kind of assumptions, there are still significant benefits to the housing first model. And so so going to, speaking specifically for the budget, I saw that in the previous staff presentation summarizing the public's views, those that were polled the public's views on whether or not they want taxes to increase or be lowered, and slightly over 50% wanted an increase in the property tax rate in order to better serve the public. In addition to that, there was around 20% that would be up for a raise in the property tax rates in order to maintain the same level of services. And the one point I would make there is, if you look at something like healthcare, what do you call maintaining services? Do you call maintaining services necessarily just spending the same amount? Or if you have, say, an aging population, if you have to spend more because you have a greater number of people that need healthcare because our population is getting older, is that considered maintaining services, or is that considered increasing services? You can look at it in a couple of different ways, right? And I think that similarly with the unsheltered population, we see that there is a greater need now. And it's not something that's just the results of, the forces of demographics of people getting older. It comes down to other policy choices that we make that make housing less affordable, including some of our zoning that doesn't allow as much housing as people want, and as dense housing as many people would like for themselves. So if anything, that increases the importance of spending on addressing and ending homelessness.
1 minute remaining.
Okay, I will leave the rest then to. I just want to briefly say, because we won't have time to go over that, we also support the previous delegates and the Reallocate Waterloo Region campaign. And I also believe that while the region does have, doesn't have unlimited power, it does have some degree of democratic leverage when it comes to the police budget, and that is the ability to send it back. And if that means that, whether or not that means that the police budget ends up being reduced, or if it kind of goes to the next level of government, I mean, ultimately, you at the region as councillors, you still have responsibility for your own decisions, whether or not you have control over everything else or not. I'm going to leave it to Kevin White to close with one final point, and thank you for your time.
Please be quick, Kevin, because the time is out.
Yes, thank you. In a couple paragraphs here, as many of you may know, we often speak in favor of increasing the supply of all housing types, whether publicly or privately provided. Far too many neighborhoods in Waterloo Region are zoned to, in whole or in part, more multi-residential housing, thereby exacerbating our housing scarcity and the cost of housing. To be clear, this does not negate the need for greater investments in affordable housing. If anything, our failure to adequately accommodate the necessary supply of housing to meet demand further contributes to the need for more affordable housing. Moreover, even if we did allow for enough overall supply to put a dent in housing costs, we would still need to directly address the needs of those most at risk of homelessness, and that is
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm looking for our next delegation, and that would be David Atten, or is that Alton? My apologies, David Alton. Hi there, David. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor and Chair, for creating space for us to speak tonight. I'm here to speak in favor of reallocating money from the police budget and directing it towards police-free community services. I would like to endorse the calls to action put forward by Reallocate Waterloo Region, which you have all received and have heard many other people endorse before me. My desire for this reallocation is because I do not believe that Waterloo Region Police Services is able to address white supremacy. I believe, and I hope many of you share this belief, that white supremacy is a public health crisis. Community members have been calling out the concerns of white supremacy in Wilmot and in the broader region for years now. Last year, my boyfriend and I had to move out of Wilmot after being harassed by a group of white supremacists who spent the summer guarding the Sir John A. Macdonald statue and hurling homophobic and racist slurs at community members. When posters then showed up for a White Lives Matter rally, and they showed up in Wilmot and actually in Wellesley and Woolwich as well, and then Wilmot councillors also received threatening letters, I reached out to all of you to respond and say that white supremacy is not welcome in our region. I'd like to thank Councillor Clark for attending our anti-racism conversations, and I'd like to thank Councillor Galloway for writing a public letter of support for our work. Waterloo Region Police Services, however, did not intervene to stop the White Lives Matter rally, and instead chose to send 5 police cars to our anti-racism rally. They took photos of families peacefully sitting on their blankets, calling for change. Police Services participated in white supremacy when they prioritized ticketing Indigenous participants at our rally who spoke about their experiences of racism. They then ticketed other anti-racist activists, despite us following COVID guidelines and mandating masks and social distancing. They then bragged about how much they policed our rally to threaten and deter other anti-racist activism in the community. All in all, around $8,000 was collected from anti-racist activists through tickets and court summons. So when I think about the police budget, I think about how many billable hours they spent surveilling anti-racist activists and developing evidence against them. In the end, it was not the police who found out anything about this White Lives Matter rally. It was community members in partnership with Anti-Hate Canada who investigated and identified the source of this threat. And despite now that being public information, the police have not ticketed or intervened with that white supremacist organizing. The message I then take from this is that the police budget goes to surveilling, threatening, ticketing, and collecting thousands of dollars from anti-racist activists and does nothing to address the very real threats of white supremacy. All these layers of white supremacy are costing you money. They are tied to your budget decisions. Last year, you heard thousands of residents marching in the streets for defunding the police, for reallocating the police budget to police-free community services like addiction supports, housing supports, mental health supports, and childcare. You heard countless stories from the community and data from experts, and yet you still voted to increase the Waterloo Region Police Services budget. At the time, many of you said you supported the calls for change, but that your hands were tied and it was out of your jurisdiction. As Sam said earlier, you have committed to advocating to the province, but where is your action? This year, it is time to act. Even if your vote doesn't stop the budget increase, it will act as a symbol that it is time to change. Let the Police Services Board revisit it. Let the community know that it is time for change. For our anti-racism rally, the support of Councillor Clark and Galloway, as well as city councillors from Waterloo, City of Waterloo, it helped legitimize the calls for anti-racist action in
1 minute
Wilmot.
left.
Please be that light through this budget process. Look at what is possible when you direct resources towards actively anti-racist action. Even if your colleagues end up voting for another police budget increase, you don't have to. Voting for another increase in the police budget when so many racialized, Indigenous, and Black communities, so many over-policed community members have shared their stories, their expertise, and solutions, it is an act of white supremacy. Please prioritize anti-racist action and reallocate the police budget to the communities that the police are harassing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see no questions, so I'm going to look to Sana Farakoi. Hello there. You have 5 minutes. Please commence. Oh, you're muted, I think. Can you test it? Can you speak to us, please? Because you don't have your mute on, but we're not hearing you. It must be oh, there's your mute button. So try unmuting now. Now, can you speak? No, we're not hearing you, Sana. I'm sorry.
Ask her to check her volume level.
Can you check on your keyboard for the volume level?
or if she has wireless headsets that are on, Chair,
Right, that's
they
a good
could,
point.
or they could be conflicting.
So you could be having conflicting technology there if you have a headset hooked up that you're not using. And there's another suggestion that was put out there. What was that, you guys? Oh, can you look at your microphone setting itself? How's that for ideas? Oh, so so we're just going to move to Peter Benninger and hold your spot when you for when you can return. So Peter, are you there? Peter Benninger?
I am, yes.
Oh, there he is. Welcome, Peter. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening to council. I'm here to talk about the proposed delay of the construction of River Road. And I'm the owner of lands that part of the roads will run through. And in fact, the region just this coming January would be 3 years since they expropriated a portion of those roads. This road has been identified for over 40 years as being needed in the community. And I was fortunate to have attended the celebration in 2014 at Regional Council when the road was approved. The EA was, after a long EA, was approved and the location was determined. It was 3 years later that the ministry finally put their stamp on the EA. And then in 2019, the design for the road, the drawings were completed so that the road could be put out to tender. 2 years ago in the capital budget, it was proposed that the road be delayed. And at that time, council unanimously voted to leave it in the budget. So here we are again, and the proposal is to delay it again. And I understand this year, I guess from new information that seems to have come out in the last week or so since the first budget meeting, that it's been suggested that it's been delayed because of the servicing EA that the city of Kitchener needs to do. My question is why was this not a reason for delay 2 years ago? There was no mention that there was a requirement by the city of Kitchener to do an EA before the region could proceed. And in fact, we've stayed in pretty constant contact with staff over the last couple of years just to understand and learn and be able to time from our perspective as to when the road was going to start. And as late as May of this year, we were told that construction of the road would be starting in the fall. I'd also like to point out that while we're here to talk about the road, its delay does stand in the way of an opportunity to build an amazing neighborhood. At the end of the day, I believe council do want to see this road get built and soon. I say that because you did unanimously vote 2 years ago to leave it in the budget. And certainly by some of the discussions and questions that have come from the last budget meeting and today's budget meeting, I believe you sincerely want to see this happen. So I guess what I'm here to ask is what mechanism can council put in place that will see this come to fruition? And I guess to put it kindly, so that we quit kicking the can down the road here. No pun intended. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I see no questions. I will look to see if we can bring Sana back. How's that?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Well done. Please proceed.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so my name is Sana and I live in Kitchener, and I've been involved along with some other community members in supporting a local family who were hurt by police intervention. So I wanted to add to the many voices of your constituents who are asking you to reject any increases to the police budget and instead reallocate funds towards the health, safety, and happiness of everyone who lives here. In particular, I support the 5 demands of Reallocate Waterloo Region. Police intervention is harmful. This shouldn't be news to you. There's no shortage of reported police violence incidents and data, even from local police itself, that once you put together with the institutional history of police in Canada, you can see that no amount of training or inclusion initiatives or anything, especially not more money, will actually make them serve the community. That's just not what their function is. Once the police enter someone's life, it harms them physically, psychologically, financially. Think of Abdi Salam Omar, think of Natasha Brooms, think of Laura's son and his neighbors who police helped evict from their home at Charles and Sterling a few weeks ago. Think of families of all forms who've been separated, broken apart because Waterloo Regional Police has sent one of them to prison or enabled their deportation. The police's actions did not help them find secure housing or help them find supports in the community or help them feel a sense of safety in the places they called home. In fact, police intervention and police action made it materially more difficult for them to do any of that. If you care about lifting people out of poverty, of making sure that everyone has shelter and sustenance, you would put money towards that. If you care about making Black people, Indigenous people, otherwise racialized people feel safe, if you care about Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus people feeling safe, if you care about disabled people feeling safe, of making migrants feel welcome and safe, of women feeling safe, then you would put money towards that instead of what makes them feel unsafe and what they keep telling you makes them feel unsafe. So yeah, that's all I have to say, and thank you so much for your time.
Much appreciated, and thank you for trying so hard to get in. Really appreciate your comments. Looking to the next delegation, Jennifer Laurie. Jennifer, are you there? There you are. Hi, Jennifer. You have
Hello.
5 minutes.
Thank you. Tonight, I'm adding my voice alongside many others in this community to ask you, Regional Council, to say no to the police budget and send it back, demanding a 0% increase. I'm also asking that we begin the process of envisioning a different path to a safe community by immediately fulfilling Council's commitment of $250,000 to facilitate community conversations and subsequent action plans for a police-free model of community care. I am making these requests because we are not being well served by the decision to continue to fund punishment when we could be funding prevention. Now, tonight, I'm not going to read off statistics or reference reports. Others have done that. What I'm going to ask you to do is to dream a bit. I'm a professional fundraiser, and I want you to think about a world where I am out of a job because the needs that I work to support don't exist. They don't exist because you dared to dream of a different way of doing things. I've been employed in the social profit sector for 25 years. For those unfamiliar with the term social profit sector, it refers to what many call the nonprofit sector, except nonprofit is a misnomer. The benefits created through the work of this sector may not reflect the purely economic definition of profit, but what this sector does profits the entire community. In fact, the social profit sector is currently filling the gaps caused by repeated policy failures. These policy failures take the form of underfunding the sector to the point of collapse. Twice in the last week, there's been media attention on the failures that continue to allow food banks to be a fixture in our communities. The first food bank in Canada opened in Edmonton in 1981. For 40 years, no one has had the political will to end hunger. No one. Meanwhile, the social profit sector is addressing the gaps with financial and volunteer support from the community. They are doing it with innovation and the scrappiness of a startup that wants to be a unicorn. Try to imagine our community without the work of this sector. We're seeing the cracks now and getting a glimpse of how bad things may become. This is because social services remain underfunded relative to the needs of our community. Governments continue to avoid the brave leadership required to shift spending to these areas of need. I would also argue that the funding for these needs has been downloaded to residents who are supporting these services through charitable giving. These same people are paying significant taxes to support an increasingly bloated yet ineffectual police force while picking up the pieces through their annual charitable giving. So why do they give? Because they know that without the organizations they support, they would be far worse off. Try to picture Waterloo Region without the network of social services, charities, and grassroots organizations that are currently caring for people. It's pretty grim. And while some organizations are by various levels of government, it's not enough. That's why they all have to engage in some form of fundraising from the community. But imagine if this sector was released from the burdens of emergency care and searching for funds. Imagine if the creativity and compassion that are the hallmarks of the sector could be channeled to dreaming and innovating rather than just moving from crisis to crisis. I want our political leaders, you, to make a radical commitment to apply the innovative and entrepreneurial spirit this region is known for to the things our community needs. And that starts with the priorities in the budget. I want us to be a region that's known for being a leader in caring, a creative problem solver, and a barn raiser for social justice, as well as a leader in tech and business. These are the hallmarks of the world-class community I want to live in and help build. For too long, we have been defunding the services that our communities need, not just denying budget increases, as I'm asking you to do this year, but actual reductions in funding. Denying the increase for this year would mean that we could start to build capacity to offer options to policing, as called for by Reallocate Waterloo Region, a 6-month pilot for a police-free public safety model. Denying the increase would mean we are putting people first. Denying the increase and asking for resubmission with a 0% increase, as has been achieved in other communities, would allow council to reallocate the proposed police budget increase of $12.4 million to addressing the homelessness crisis.
1 minute, Jennifer.
Thank you. I'd like to end with a quote from Robert Fulghum. Many of you may know him as the author of All I Needed to Know in Life, I Learned in Kindergarten, but he also said these wise words, and I think they apply well here. It will be a great day when our schools have all the money they need, and the Air Force has to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now looking for Nigel Gordyke. Nigel, are you there? There you are. Wonderful.
Yes,
Welcome.
sorry, it's pronounced Gordyke.
Can you say that again?
Gordyke.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Like many other residents in the region, I was shocked and heartbroken to witness the events of November 26th, when regional staff cleared an encampment of people who were living in tents near Charles and Stirling in Kitchener. A Caterpillar backhoe loader, which was designed for construction, was used to destroy the homes and belongings of vulnerable citizens. It's not just the method of the clearance that bothered me. It was the idea that someone in a position of authority thought it was acceptable to try and erase these people who were offending our view. A statement attributed to the CAO said that the region is conducting a review of the encampment clearance process. An internal process review will reveal the chain of decisions that led to this destruction, but it won't explain why those choices were even considered. That is a matter of culture, and it's something I believe should be explored externally. I've read messages of shock and apology from some members of council and its most senior member of staff, but those were directed at people like me who have access to social and traditional news media, even though I'm not the one who deserves an apology. Have any council members or senior staff spoken to the people who suffered the indignity of having their belongings destroyed? Has anyone apologized to them? 2 days after the demolition, I joined 200 fellow citizens at a protest nearby, where we showed our support for the people who had lived there, as well as others who were experiencing homelessness. We heard from people who have dealt with that experience themselves, as well as the mother of one of the men who was removed from the encampment. I imagine that all of you on council are like me, and you've never had to consider a life on the street. After the protest ended, I walked from Charles Street to downtown Kitchener. I passed the museum on King, where a celebration of the Rolling Stones, a band from 3,500 miles away, has just opened. The unzipped exhibition includes, and I'm quoting from its website, an immersive, realistic reconstruction of their Chelsea flat. In other words, one of the exhibits is an artificial apartment. 52 years ago, the Stones sang, "If I don't get some shelter, I'm going to fade away." A few weeks after council chose to give financial support to this exhibition, the region also decided the solution to a homeless encampment was to erase it. This is a budget meeting, and I've been talking about the culture of this organization, but that culture affects the financial choices you're making. Perhaps I'm being unfair by criticizing the region as if you are somehow separate from us, the public. While you are our leaders, the decisions you make reflect our priorities as a community. You are us. When a decision is made to fund an increasingly bloated police budget, rather than adequately support initiatives that would reduce crime, we end up criminalizing our less fortunate citizens who would benefit from those supports. As other delegations have pointed out, that is counterintuitive. It costs more to police crime than it does to prevent it. After the encampment clearance, the region's CAO was quoted as saying, "This is not who we are." We are all judged by the actions we take and not just the words that we say. If we, the citizens of this region, decide that crushing the possessions of our community's home is acceptable, then we have lost our way and we have lost our capacity for empathy. We have chosen to be callous and uncaring. If we consider the region's actions on November 26th to be reasonable, who we truly are, we need to change the way that we think. As you consider the budget that's before you, I'm asking you to begin a cultural shift by making financial decisions that are backed by empathy and compassion. I know that some of you on council, if not all of you, are people of faith. If the events of 2,000 years ago took place right now, right here in our community, would you consider the region's actions at Charles Street to be a compassionate response? When someone is seeking shelter, would you reject them from our society by ploughing them out of the way? Whether you are elected representatives or members of staff, you are all community leaders. I'm asking you, imploring you to look within your hearts and lead us in building a more compassionate, caring region by choosing to fund supports for our vulnerable citizens, rather than punishing the victims of our community's failures. That is not who we are, not yet, but that is who we could be. Thank you.
Thank you, much appreciated. I see no questions, so we'll continue through our delegations, and I'm looking for Samantha. Samantha, there you are. Welcome. Please begin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Regional Council. My name is Samantha Estoesta, and I expect that most of you will have some idea of what my delegation entails, as my last correspondence on November 29th, 2021 was included in the official record at the previous budget meeting. I've been a community organizer for a very long time, starting in my undergraduate at the University of Waterloo to my time presently with Reallocate Waterloo Region. I've seen the ebbs and flows when it comes to community engagement and positive social change. And I really thought that having 30,000 people in the streets in support of Black Lives Matter would be a watershed moment. And yet here residents are a year and a half later still asking Regional Council to do the right thing. I'm not going to explain again why funding upstream services decreases the financial burden on downstream services or the lasting impacts of underfunding social services and funding punitive services to the most marginalized in our community, particularly Black and Indigenous peoples. I'm not going to reiterate the way that we protect public property instead of people experiencing homelessness and their belongings as a direct reflection of what our region values. Instead, I'm going to acknowledge the inspiring, hope-filled grassroots groundswell of community support for Reallocate Waterloo Region's asks. Instead of a few letters and delegations like there was last budget cycle, we have over 60 pages of letters and over 45 delegations asking you to reallocate funding to upstream services instead of increasing the Waterloo Regional Police Services budget by $12.4 million. It's not just the same four people, as suggested by some online, that keep on asking. It's the community, and our numbers are growing every day. We are motivated voters who will not forget your voting records next year when we go to the ballot box. At the end of the day, our community values are demonstrated by what we prioritize. That means what we do, what we don't do, and what we fund. And we, residents and voters of Waterloo Region, we are asking our elected officials to accomplish what we elected them to do. Reflect the voices of our constituents and in your voting records. Therefore, along with so many here speaking tonight and those who have sent in correspondence in support of Reallocate Waterloo Region, I am once again asking Regional Council to 1, develop an Indigenous community hub at the Charles Street Terminal in relationship with the Indigenous community. 2, reject the WRPS budget increase proposal and demand a 0% increase in the WRPS budget. 3, immediately fulfill its commitment of $250,000 to facilitate community conversation and subsequent action plans for a police-free community care model. 4, allocate the equivalent of the maximum WRPS budget increase of $12.4 million to community-led homelessness and housing affordability strategies, including the immediate development and/or procurement of a housing stock and shelter space. And 5, commit $1 million towards funding mental health and neurodevelopmental resources and services for IBPOC, Two-Spirit LGBTQ+, persons with living with disabilities, and other communities impacted by the trauma of police violence. It is so moving to see how we've grown over this year. And Reallocate Waterloo Region isn't going anywhere. We are going to continue to hold your feet to the fire. We're going to continue to demand a region where we can be proud of, where we care for the most marginalized, where we truly innovate the way that we actually think about community care. And if you think that we're going to be deterred by the number of times where we see that your choices go towards the WRPS budget comparatively to our community, it will not stop us. It will just have us grow in larger and numbers. I'm really excited to see as we continue to push towards this region that I know will be. And I hope that as you think about what you're going to do when it comes to voting for the police budget, you think about those voices that continue to grow in support of Reallocate Waterloo Region. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no questions. I'm looking for Melissa Bowman. Melissa, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hello, Melissa. Please commence.
Hi there. Thanks. I don't think I can really say things much better than many of the previous delegations, but just a few quick thoughts. So there are many things I'd like to speak to on the proposed budget. For example, given the region committed in June to the 50 by 30 goal on climate action, I think the proposed change to the waste collection for multi-residential homes is a move in the wrong direction. I also think we need to be spending less on road expansions and more on safe, active transportation options. However, I want to spend most of my allotted time on housing, upstream supports, and the police budget. The region recently completed its point-in-time count and outlined the top services that would be helpful to survey respondents. 87% said finding affordable housing, and 69% said housing search support, including support workers. Survey respondents also identified the challenges to finding housing, and the top two responses were low income and rents too high. These are the issues that we must address. How can we say we have a housing first model when we simply don't have enough housing to offer everyone who needs it? When we have wait lists for a non-senior one-bedroom home of nearly 8 years on average? Removing residents from encampments does nothing to solve these problems and only causes additional harm. We need to decriminalize poverty and sanction encampments now as we work towards improving access and availability of more permanent housing. Recently, the police chief stated that he was fed up with the police budget being targeted. Well, we're hearing from many residents who are taking the time through these budget input sessions to say that we're fed up too. Fed up with reactive interventions such as evictions from encampments, fed up with the status quo that assumes the police must be the answer to every challenge our community faces. We have been trying to police our way out of these issues for far too long. If we want change, we must take action that supports it. That's why I support Reallocate Waterloo Region's calls to action, as they show us a compassionate way forward. It's time to invest deeply in people, in prevention, and in caring, compassionate models of support. This isn't even a call for a reduction in funding to police. We're asking them to work with the same as last year, which was also an increase over the previous year, as is so often the case, and to instead shift those funds to community-led models. Chief Larkin has said he supports the idea, so let's put it in action, because you can't support it without backing it with funding. We hear that police are the default support since they are the only ones available for that call at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. But that didn't just happen. The police have seen year after year increases of millions of dollars, which allows them to be the only service available. No other regional service receives even close to the funding that the police do. So let's start building those alternatives now. It won't just happen. We must decide as a community to invest heavily in those alternatives. A very small first step to do that has been laid out by Reallocate WR, a 0% police budget increase this year, and to use that proposed increase to instead support compassionate and life-giving services. Of course, if council is determined that the police should get this increase, then maybe you need to consider raising taxes to give those community supports the same increase. But looking at previous budgets, it seems council is hesitant to raise taxes for everything but policing. We have heard that this region strives to be a world-class community. It's a lofty goal for sure, and one that doesn't come by easily, simply by adding hashtags to social media posts. It comes from doing the hard work and making the difficult decisions that will support all of our residents and prioritizes our more vulnerable residents. It means you need to be bold and brave in order to work against the status quo. And I get it. The status quo is safe and there's an election next year. But doing more of the same isn't going to get us where we need to be. Reallocate WR has done important work in identifying actions that you can take during these budget decisions that will put us on the right path to creating important changes that support all of our residents. I urge you to implement those actions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see no questions. I am now looking for Melissa Vallant. Melissa Vallant, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Good evening, Chair Redmond and regional councillors. I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. I too am speaking to the desperate need for a reallocation of funds this year. I am a mother of 3 children here in our community and a teacher in one of our local schools. I've taken it upon myself to do the work of unlearning and re-educating myself, still learning a great deal about my privilege and the way the world around me still continues to operate to the status quo. I wanted to just touch on a couple of issues that also kind of became more apparent to me in my last few years of also working with a great group of people at the Saturday suppers at Sterling, which is can't be running during COVID, but that brought a lot of things to light for me in my journey. And just looking at a lot of information that we've always been provided with in working with that particular organization. So when we look at particularly right now, all of the issues that we've been having with homelessness, homelessness in our region has tripled in the last 3 years. Over 50% of our homeless individuals in the region are Indigenous, and they're already suffering with trauma that they deal with often, typically with the Waterloo Region Police Force. We're also starting to look at a very high number of young people between the ages of 16 and 25 who are also living with homelessness here in our community. Food costs on top of all of that for individuals at this point are 10 to 15% higher than what they used to be. And this year in particular, families are looking at an increase in $700 more for the year for the cost of that. If we were looking at an average family of 4 people, that's $14,000 for food alone. In this last period of time during the pandemic, we've looked at a 26% increase in the amount of food distributed, 36% of which are individuals under the age of 18. We have more than 33,000 people in this area that have to access emergency food services through the food bank. And it's wonderful that we have these organizations to provide support to, whether monetarily or with actual items and foods to supply those that are suffering from food insecurity, but that's not solving the problem that we clearly have in this community. We also know that people that suffer from food insecurity in this area are more likely to struggle with depression, anxiety, and mood disorders, which are areas that require a great deal of support in our community and anywhere else. With some of those struggles, and being that they are often interconnected, we've been dealing with an opioid crisis in this area during the pandemic, and we have over 6,700 people in this community waiting for affordable housing. With respect to what happened with the encampment a couple weeks ago, I thought it might be important to recognize some statements made by my own children in traveling past the encampment. And I think it's very poignant to bring to light that a 13 and 15-year-old, both my daughters, in driving past the encampment, looking at it after it had been uprooted, and knowing that there had been police involvement, them themselves saying, you know, why are the police here, Mom? This isn't a crime. Poverty isn't a crime. Why aren't other organizations here able to give them the help that they need? These are very young people in our community who are able to make that deduction on their own and not with any information that I'm providing them. That's coming from the mouths of babes, as we say. Homelessness, addiction, poverty, these things that exist in our community and are of great concern are not a crime. that our system has caused this problem, and more of a police presence is more traumatizing than it is helpful to any of these individuals suffering in any of the capacities that I've indicated. Funds are desperately needed to be reallocated to better support these people in these areas, and policing is not the answer to deal with the crisis. Just as Judah had said previously, and some of our other speakers tonight, this is a community where we need to see dignity, respect, love, and caring being shown to everyone, because everyone here in this community deserves love, dignity, care, and respect. So let's not just talk the talk, let's walk the talk. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Melissa. I see no questions. I'm looking for William Turman. William, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Vaguely, is there anything you can do?
Can you hear me? Is that coming through?
Yeah, that's better. Yes, please commence. You have 5 minutes, William.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. My name is William Turman, and I am here in support of Reallocate WR's 5 calls to action. I specifically want to talk about call number 2 to reject the Waterloo Region Police Service's proposed budget increase and demand a 0% increase in the Waterloo Police Service's budget, and call number 4 to allot the amount of WRPS have requested, which is $12 million, to a community-led homelessness and housing affordability strategy, including the immediate development and/or procurement of housing stock and shelter space. I want to speak to housing specifically because that was my area of research as a graduate student in planning at the University of Waterloo, and as a researcher with the local social development center, and personally as a community member who's interested in housing. As a person of privilege, I am not often targeted by police, but I listen to my neighbors, I listen to my friends, and I listen to those with less privilege and who have personal experience. I constantly hear about how violent and unhelpful policing services are, and how current efforts towards eradicating homelessness are deeply and increasingly insufficient. I am not the first person to speak at this meeting tonight. You probably have heard some of the other stories. I have been a delegation to the region in the past when I commended council and the region on its commitment towards building affordable housing in the long term and the affordable housing strategy. I also critiqued that framework for not being nearly ambitious enough, nor adequate for the immediate needs of people on the street today. And since last year, when I spoke, the number of people experiencing homelessness has grown by 50% from 700 to over 1,085, based on previous municipal staff reports and the recent point-in-time count. This year, House of Friendship has closed its doors, reducing our shelter capacity by almost 100 at a time when it is the most vital coming into the winter. The waiting list for the supportive housing in the region, as has been said before, is over 6,000 and is not getting smaller. Housing prices have also increased by approximately 30% this year, yet rather than deal with these immediate life and death issues to protect our neighbors, we are proposing $12 million more for the police. Police are not good at protecting people. This past 2 years, I have seen outrageous and flagrant and almost daily abuse of power and downright police violence from police towards my BIPOC neighbors and against homeless. And what we saw last week with the clearing of the encampment is just the latest in a long line that goes back further than just 2 years of violent and callous evictions that often lead to death. Police claim to protect people and to prevent crime. If being homeless is a crime, then police are not even remotely equipped to protect anyone from it or prevent the crime of being homeless. I've also been paying attention to regional council for quite a while now. When asked to decriminalize homelessness and sanction encampments in the past, the response was that council wants to end homelessness, not to manage it. Well, what we saw last week with the violent eviction of homeless people being overseen by bylaw and police officers is what managing homelessness looks like. Those who are evicted are not helped. They are just moved to another place where the process will be repeated. I've also heard from council that there is a need for police because of violent crime, and I definitely heard one of you say that criminals may have machine guns. Violent crime is only a small fraction of what police do. Surely, we can write speeding tickets without the need for a gun. Surely, the person who responds to mental health crises doesn't also need a monopoly on violence.
1 minute left, William.
If council were serious about ending homelessness, I have an easy solution we could do right now, which implements Reallocate WR's second and fourth calls to action. With $12 million, the amount the police board is requesting, if we assume a flat rent for apartments at $2,000, which might include $1,500 for rent and $500 for administration supports, you could partner with landlords and rent 500 apartments for people to live in. This would house half of all of the homeless that were counted in the point in time count, permanently and immediately. And that could probably go a lot further if initiatives like A Better Tent City are sanctioned and supported. Please consider it. We can either make 35 more jobs for a department that a growing number don't trust and who claim to protect, or we could house and protect 500 people. We can manage homelessness, or we can end it. Thank you.
Thank you, William. I appreciate you coming in today. I see no hands, and at this particular point in time, we have a scheduled break. Can I see a sign of acceptance for that? Yes, okay. All right, so we'll be back in 10 minutes. 1 minute warning. Oh my God. Well, yeah, bullet. No, I've got water. I'm good. Oh, yeah. Okay, we're on. And I'm looking for Charlotte Prong. Charlotte, are you there? Hello, Charlotte. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Please proceed. You have 5 minutes.
I'm going to start my remarks tonight not with a land acknowledgement, but with a land call to action, and that is simply land back. As one of the excellent community leaders in Waterloo Region, Amy Smoke, says, Indigenous lands belong in Indigenous hands. I'm speaking in support of all 5 of Reallocate Waterloo Region's calls to action. The first of those, to develop an Indigenous community hub at the Charles Street Terminal, is an action we can take now to begin the process of land back. The second call to action is to reject the police budget increase proposal and demand a 0% increase in the police budget. I want you to imagine walking into your kitchen and seeing water pouring out of the tap into a plugged sink. It's pouring down the cupboards, it's all over the floor, and the water level is rising. What are you going to do? Are you going to grab a mop and start trying to soak it up? Or are you going to run over and turn the tap off? The water pouring out of the tap is the Waterloo Region Police budget, and you must turn it off now. Turning off the tap allows you to turn your attention to the harms caused, and then to grab a mop and start fixing the situation. You can and you must invest more funds in stable, long-term, and out-of-market housing, harm reduction related to substance use, and mental health resources. You can and you must invest more funds into anti-racist initiatives and supports specifically for Black people and Indigenous people, and for other people of color, for people with disabilities, and for the Two-Spirit LGBTQ community. But you cannot simply add a bit of investment here and there while the police budget continues to grow. You can no longer ignore the harms caused to those communities by policing itself, and the harms caused to the community as a whole when we defund important budget items in favor of the police. To give you one example, there is a push to create mental health responses that do not include police, and that is the correct thing to do. However, as you fund new mental health response teams, removing most, if not all, mental health calls from the purview of police, you must also cut the police budget by a corresponding amount. Otherwise, the police will simply find other things to spend that money on, things that will cause further harm and continue to hurt the people that you are newly investing in. The tap will keep flowing while we're trying to mop up. I'm asking that you not leave the tap flowing for police to spend on additional officers who will continue to stop, criminalize, and surveil Black people at disproportionate rates. I am asking that you not leave the tap flowing for police to spend on body cameras, which do nothing to prevent crime, and as recent history has amply demonstrated, often do not function or are turned off when police themselves are committing crimes. I'm asking that you not leave the tap flowing for police to purchase more guns, armored vehicles, and surveillance tools that promote the militarization of our community. I'm asking that you not leave the tap flowing for police to criminalize the poor, and in particular, those who are unhoused or underhoused. I know you don't control police budgets or the line budget, but that is not material to the demand for a 0% increase to the police budget for 2022. You do have a vote on the amount of police funding. The proposed tax increase for the average homeowner is $44 for policing alone, the water that's flooding the kitchen, and just $63 for mops and everything else this community needs. That's 41% of the increase just for police. It doesn't make sense economically. It doesn't make sense ethically. It's harmful. It's time to turn it off.
Much appreciated. I see no questions, so I will look for Judith Queller. Judith, are you there?
Yes, I'm, and I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see that slide?
Can. Yes. Welcome.
All
Please,
right.
please begin.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it. I do want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, and that the Haldimand Tract was promised and given to the Six Nations, even though only a small portion of that tract is occupied by the Six Nations reserved today. So we are on stolen land, and issues of police and homelessness, as we've seen, disproportionately affect Indigenous people. So my perspective is that I teach a course at the University of Waterloo that's on the use of mathematics in fostering peace. And so framed another way, it's looking at what data can tell us on how to strengthen our communities. And so looking at the data, we've studied the occurrence data that's been made public by the Waterloo Regional Police. I do really appreciate their transparency in making that data available to the public to research in different ways. And in addition to studying that data, we've heard firsthand from Waterloo Regional Police staff about police being often called to so-called wellness checks for vulnerable people. They're the ones that are answering the phone when somebody calls 911 at 3 a.m. But as we've seen, there are other professionals with other skill sets that would be better to help in many of these situations. And there have been numerous cases in Canada where wellness checks by police result in someone's death, and I've cited some of the news articles around that. I was sickened by the bulldozing of the few possessions that were keeping some of our community's most vulnerable people alive. And the fact that this was done without regard for where the people would go is further evidence that we need a wider skill set than just the police to address these issues. And even if we look at it just from the point of view of numbers and money, there's numerous studies that show that preventing homelessness costs less in the end than things like the healthcare and emergency services that are associated with homelessness. So all of this aligns with calls to defund the police, and it recognizes that dealing with the root issues is much more humane, more effective, and less costly. So I want to urge you to reject the proposed increase to the Waterloo Regional Police budget, focus on sheltering our most vulnerable people, and I support the 5 calls from Reallocate Waterloo Region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm looking for Tennille Warren. Tennille, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you.
There we go. Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. The region of Waterloo, through various communication channels, has secured a vision for a world-class community. But what is the definition of a world-class community? With more than 80% of the world having been colonized, striving to build a world-class community seems a vision of maintaining systemic racism inequities, and ongoing violence targeted at Black, Indigenous, racialized, and other historically harmed bodies. The systems built during the period of early colonization exist and resonate today. This council structure was built on colonization and colonialism. Perhaps then the goal should not be a world-class community, but a life-affirming community. A life-affirming community leads with love and compassion. It honors the inherent dignity of all of its residents. Yet this is not the reality in Waterloo region. In our region, inequity and insecurity continue to grow, while the dominant classes continue to reap the success of mergers, ballooning tech industries, and a $200 million personal security service called policing. If we look close at the agenda for tonight, we have a series of delegates advocating to this council for the reallocation of the police budget to life-affirming and dignity services that provide access to sustainable livelihoods for themselves, their neighbors, family members, friends, and people they will never meet. This is a collective groundswell for a life-affirming community. In 2020, Waterloo Region hosted one of the largest Black solidarity marches in Canada. Since then, we have seen a growing movement across Indigenous, Black, Palestinian, Muslim, queer, and other historically harmed communities speaking loudly to the impact of police violence and trauma. I am an abolitionist. An abolition presents a vision of safe, accountable communities that end and transform cycles of white supremacist violence in ways that do not exacerbate existing harm along the way. In response to this positioning, we're often challenged with the narrative of how do we achieve public safety outside of policing. Yet safety is not defined by good people and bad people. Safety is not the opposite of violence. Safety is access to shelter, a viable income, the social of health that create a sustainable livelihood for all. The political definition of safety that underpins police power is rudimentary and rigid. It divides society into good versus evil. Good by standards, evil by whose standards? I refer you to my opening statement that 80% of the world was colonized. Thus, the disproportionate impact on Black, Indigenous, and poor white bodies through policing is not a fluke of one bad cop or the absence of diversity initiatives or not enough Black officers. It is embedded into the systems, and every time the police receive a budget increase, you reinforce violence against those communities. You sanction the criminalizing of poverty, homelessness, hunger, survival economies, and a lack of access to life-affirming, dignified services, to name a few. Marginalized communities disproportionately end up navigating survival economies that are themselves criminalized. Once a community becomes labeled as deviant and criminal, it becomes easier for the state to target them with policing, surveillance, and punishment. Abolition requires shifting away from this label towards a model that decenters criminality. I have lived the impact of police violence, but I won't give you the privilege of ignoring my trauma while you are quite visibly not offering me your undivided attention. Nor should I need to. In response to 20,000 marching in the streets, the Regional Council hosted a trauma town hall where Black, Indigenous, racial members of this region were subjected to displaying their trauma to prove to this white council that racism is real and exists in Waterloo region. While the most marginalized were forced to qualify their dignity and trauma, something else was happening. A robust police marketing initiative to send the message that we don't understand policing, that this colonial harm, this runs counter to all the statements that have been made. To quote several members of the council, racism has no place in Waterloo region. Hollow rhetoric that does not equate to action. Police budgets depend heavily on crime cost analysis. How much a crime may cost is directly correlated to how much a police budget will seek. The crime cost calculator considers public safety and the performance of the economy. This is a business case for the overinvestment in policing, and Chief Larkin is a master storyteller. If this is about the economy, consider the wealth generation impact of dismantling systemic racism and oppression, addressing hunger, homelessness, the opioid crisis, lack of mental health supports, ending police brutality, and honoring Indigenous sovereignty. We could be experiencing actual safety as people would have access to their needs. Finally, we abolitionists are well informed. We're aware that you do not make the final decision on the policing budget, but you have the option to stand with the community and send the budget back and request a 0% increase. You have spoken to the futility of this action. You've essentially labeled advocacy for our community as a waste of time. So it must be understood and stated very boldly. To continue to fund policing over dignity is an act of white supremacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanil. Laura Coakley. Laura, are you there? You have 5 minutes. Please begin.
Hi, thank you. My name is Laura, and I'm here in support of Reallocate Waterloo Region's calls to reject the proposed police budget increase and ask for a 0% increase of their budget for 2022. As a Kitchener citizen and someone that works in the homelessness and housing sectors, I strongly believe that our community needs more intensive and ongoing community approaches to some of the challenges our community faces. As part of this conversation, I think it's important to go back to what our region states are our priorities. The Waterloo Region's strategic focus of 2019 to 2023 highlights 6 areas of importance: a thriving economy, sustainable transportation, environment and climate change action, healthy, safe, and inclusive communities, responsive and engaging public service, and our people. I will touch on a few of these. A thriving economy would include a better quality of life for all community members, which includes rights to housing. We know that during the point in time count in late September, there were 1,085 of our community members experiencing homelessness. We also know that for those that are living in encampments outside, they have faced tremendous obstacles when finding a permanent location and access to community resources. This happened a few weeks ago at Charles and Sterling in Kitchener, which was bulldozed, but also happened a few years ago on the Iron Horse Trail and in Victoria Park. Waterloo Region stated in early October that homelessness programs are facing a $6 million funding shortfall at such a crucial time when the eviction moratorium has been lifted. House of Friendship's men's shelter has temporarily closed. Shelters are consistently filling up, and the number of individuals and families on the affordable housing waitlist is over 7,000. Another focus area is on healthy, safe, and inclusive communities. Within a 6-month period from January to June this year, Waterloo Regional police officers used or threatened force against 21 Black people, which is 4 times higher than white people. Just last year, a report showed that there was an overrepresentation of Black people within intelligence notes made by Waterloo Regional police officers, illustrating how much more frequently racialized individuals are surveilled and observed compared to white individuals in our community. Further, a responsive and engaging public service should include a variety of stakeholders and organizations that have specialized expertise and resources to support our diverse communities. Police services are asking for $12 million to be added to their budget for 2022, which includes adding 35 police officers. This money should be reallocated to mental health services, harm reduction outreach supports, affordable housing organizations, and other vital community resources who are and should be on the front lines of this work. In a 2016 article in The Record, it stated that the most frequent calls the police receive were calls for a wellness check on a neighbor or loved one. Stats Canada provides a list of selected police reported crimes and calls for service on their website. For our region, I broke this up between calls with potential violent outcomes. So that would include assault, sexual assault, threats, domestic disturbances, and assault against public officers, and those that are specific to wellness checks, such as mental health crises, suicide or attempted suicide, and overdose. Between January to July of this year, there were more calls related to mental health crises and wellness checks than there were calls related to potentially violent outcomes. That's over 8,000 calls that should have been fielded by mental health supports and services within our community. For the other types of calls, we need to be asking the question as to whether adding more police officers actually addresses violent crimes. With a lot of the mental health organizations in our region, they are focused on not only intervening when a mental health crisis occurs, but also funding important preventative measures to support individuals before a mental health crisis actually happens. What is our police service doing now that actually prevents assaults, threats, and domestic disturbances? Community leaders and organizations have been asking this question for years and coming up with ways they can address and prevent these issues while being trauma-informed and considering diversity and equity in their approaches. This is where regional funding should be allocated. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking for Helen Schaefer, please. Helen Schaefer, are you there?
Yes, and although it says Howard, I'm Helen. So good evening. I'm speaking as a concerned taxpayer. Over the last 7-8 years, I have been noticing the steady yearly increase the police budget, and I have been writing letters to the record advocating for some positive changes. Back in 2014, when Tom Galloway was the chair of the police board, he would often repeat the refrain of unsustainable year after year, but as surely as Christmas comes, so did the raises to the police budget. Also, bear in mind that compensation makes up about 90% of the police budget. Compensation in 2020 for the average police employee was close to $140,000 in wages and benefits. I know now, is it impolite or even crass perhaps to talk about police salaries? No, not when if we, the public taxpayers, are the ones that fund these wages. And actually, it is the elephant in the room and the main driver of these substantial budget increases. It's 90% of their budget. The gap between police employees and a municipal employee rose to almost 42,000 in 2020 from about 25,000 in 2013. That gap represents more than a 40% increase in police wages compared to other municipal employees over the last 7 to 8 years. Yet, Chief Larkin said in a recent write-up in the record regarding the police budget, for me, enough is enough. We need to invest. But we have invested, and numbers don't lie. So what is our payoff for these annual increases? If the answer is to keep dumping money into this budget, then we should be seeing visible, measurable results and outcomes. The answer is, this year, like many past years, we are putting our money in the wrong place. We are not getting to the root of the problem. We keep expecting police to fix it all. They can't. Recent discourse right across Canada on the economics of policing emphasizes efficiency and getting more from existing resources, not necessarily increasing them. The big question is why? Why do we keep doing this despite all the evidence that it is simply not working? How can we keep doing the same thing year after year and expect the results to be different? It's mind-boggling. Studies show that violent crime across Canada has significantly decreased over the last 3 decades, despite recent increases that some scholars associate with the COVID-19 spillovers related to high unemployment and underemployment. Compared to many other countries, Canada is a relatively safe place to live. So why do we espouse this culture of fear in our communities? We seem to think that police represent the fine line between lawfulness and total mayhem and chaos. And that just simply is not true. Can the police really fix all of our problems? No, they can't. The police are not the be-all and the end-all. It doesn't matter how many more police officers you hire or how much more money you keep putting into their budget. Police do not prevent all violence and crime.
Please, Helen.
1 minute.
They respond to it. Prevention is the key. And prevention comes from community-based resources that get to the solutions that are at the root of the problem. There is a call right now, right across North America, for drastic police reform and changes in police culture. And a lot of people already talked about a lot of the calls the police make are for mental health issues, addiction issues, and not in their call of duty. So what do we do? A huge proposed police budget. So is it really in our best interest right now in the midst of a pandemic to increase our budget to that extent? And it's simple math. There's only so much money in the pot. Taxpayers are already feeling financially squeezed. So do we continue to invest in policing, or do we redirect more money to non-police community-based supports? We simply can't afford to do both. I think as a community, we have dug ourselves into a hole. We have overvalued our police. We have overwhelmed them with responsibilities that are not part of their job description, and we have simply overpaid them, perhaps to justify our huge expectations of them. And please, I mean no disrespect to the police in saying that they do serve a vital role in our community, but the reality is that we are getting to the tipping point. We cannot afford to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. As council members representing the community, you are called on to make the hard decisions, the decisions that will serve us all well now and in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Helen. I'm now looking for Megan Rutten or Rattan. Megan, are you there?
Sure.
Is she in the waiting room?
I am here. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Please
Sorry, I was looking for that mute button.
Please begin. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Regional Council. My name is Meg Rattan Walker, and I'm a local climate organizer and advocate, most recently organizing the 50 by 30 Waterloo region for the goal of 50% emissions reductions by 2030. Today, I'm here in my personal capacity as an organizer and activist in support of a 0% police budget increase and the 5 demands of Reallocate Waterloo region, and the previous recommendations made by our community members here tonight. We cannot keep funneling money towards policing the outcomes of policy choices that make people vulnerable. Homelessness, drug use, and other criminalized activities comes a direct result of leaders' unwillingness to invest in our collective good. Instead, we choose to perpetuate further harm on victims of that neglect. Furthermore, as others here have told you tonight, policing is discriminatory against Black, Indigenous, and racialized people here in Waterloo region and elsewhere across the world. I'd also like to draw Council's attention to the criminalization of activism and mandated civil and human rights of every one of us that is to protest. In BC, the RCMP deploys snipers to monitor land protectors who only want to ensure the land is safe for their communities and for future generations everywhere. Right now in the UK, Boris Johnson's government seeks to outlaw protest as a result of the peaceful Extinction Rebellion protests. Protests that are demanding a low-carbon future of the kind that Waterloo region has already supposedly committed to. Everyone here voted on that. Police and policing are the frontline defense of vested interests in quashing human rights and the right to demand a livable future for everyone. We should be using this money to transform ourselves into a zero-carbon community that takes care of people rather than punishes them. Increasing the police budget runs counter to the values that the region claims for itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm looking for Jessica Hutchison. Jessica, are you there?
Yep, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes. Please begin.
Thank you, Chair Jowett and regional councillors, for the opportunity to speak about the budget. My name is Jessica Hutchison, and I am a PhD candidate in social work at Laurie, studying how violence is embedded within state legislation, policies, and practices. I'm a member of Reallocate Waterloo Region and was one of the anti-racist activists surveilled and ticketed by the WRPS that David Alton spoke about earlier. I've been sitting back, listening to the excellent delegations tonight, and there is a strong theme emerging. Homelessness is a choice, but not in the way we have been led to believe. Homelessness is a choice by politicians and decision makers. As we speak, there are hundreds of people in our community living on the streets. However, as Dr. Jeff Nelson wrote in the Record on Monday, ending homelessness in our region is within the grasp of council. Yet, here we are, seriously debating giving the WRPS an additional $12.4 million on top of their $185 million operating budget, all while people are suffering in our region. This is a choice. The pandemic has exposed and exacerbated social inequities such that more people are becoming homeless, using the food bank, and experiencing poor mental health. And more incidences of domestic violence are occurring. These issues cannot and should not be addressed by the police. They can only be reduced by and eliminated by investing in preventative measures that provide pathways to sustainable livelihoods. But over the years, we have made the choice to prioritize policing to the detriment of these approaches. We continuously inject funding into policing more than any other service. In fact, the proposed police budget increase accounts for 41% of the proposed property tax increase. 41%. That is a choice. We continue to pour why do we continue to pour money into a system that is designed to react to harm after it's already occurred? Into a system that disproportionately harms Black, Indigenous, poor people, and those in mental health crisis? Into a system that prioritizes property over people? To answer this question, I'd like to show you an image. On the left is the destruction of the tent encampment a couple of weeks ago at Charles and Sterling. On the right is the $50 million police station currently being built. These images, side by side, accurately portray the priorities in our region. A community's values are demonstrated by where it invests money, and as these images show, our values are completely backwards. This is largely because of the belief that police provide safety and justice. However, as Black organizer and activist Mariam Kaba encourages, I'd like us to think about safety and justice differently. I'd like us to think about it as the ability for people to get what they need in order to lead dignified lives. We can use this expanded definition as a measuring stick. To judge whether we are a world-class region, we need to ask ourselves one simple question. Does every single person in our region have what they need in order to lead dignified lives? Right now, the answer is no. And this is a choice. Part of the justification for the increase in the police budget is to hire more officers to get on par with the national average. However, this is not something we should aspire to, as it does not produce more safety. It actually creates less safety. And it will cost every single person in our region more money. This is a choice. Similarly, increasing the number of emergency shelter beds should not be something we are proud of. It should actually be a source of shame, as it demonstrates that we have failed the people in our community who need us the most. We have turned into a community where we take pride in partnership that is providing emergency shelter in a church because we do not have safe, affordable, permanent housing for every person in this region. We like to say we are a housing first community, but we are actually a policing first community. The good thing is that it doesn't have to be this way. As leaders in Waterloo region, you can choose to invest in community so that people have what they need to lead dignified lives. I urge you to reject the police budget and meet the other calls to action from Reallocate Waterloo region. Lives literally depend upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Justin Boer, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome, Justin. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks. Hello. I'm here to support the calls for Reallocate Waterloo Region regarding the budget, specifically voting against any increase to the police budget. After the murder of George Floyd, tens of thousands of people marched in the streets calling for more work to be done to address racism. That year, Council still approved a budget increase to the police, despite calls from countless Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks. This year, you have the chance to do the right thing. I support the steps outlined by Reallocate Waterloo Region for many reasons. Here are a few. First, policing in this country is rooted in colonialism and white supremacy. This is a fact. The Northwest Mounted Police were created to displace Indigenous people from their land. This racism at the root of policing continues to this day. We know Waterloo Police disproportionately stop and use force on Black people. Chief Larkin has admitted this himself. How can we continue to increase funding to an organization that is rooted in white supremacy, continues white supremacy, and when even the idea of reducing the budget is mentioned, Chief Larkin threatens to stop collecting race-based data? Council has talked a big game about anti-racism, but when it comes to one of the most oppressive systems in the region, they continue to abdicate their responsibility. Countless studies and scholars from a variety of fields of expertise have shown the harm policing does to so many in this community. But just as important as history and scholarship is to this subject, the voices of Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks should move you to tangible action. For years, people have had to relive their traumatic experiences in an effort to convince the sea of white faces before me to take action. How many more stories do you need to hear? How many more Indigenous people need to be targeted and harassed by the police, sometimes even in front of their children? How many more unarmed people need to be violently assaulted and tased like Mr. Omer was? How long will it take for council to step out of their privilege and actually listen and take action? The Waterloo Region Police is also spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, almost nearly $1 million, fighting women who say they have experienced sexual harassment and other unsafe working conditions as police officers. How can the council continue to fund the silencing of women's voices calling out sexism and misogyny? And how can members of this council who are on the police service board continue to make Chief Larkin one of the highest paid public employees in the region while he continues to perpetuate these harms? To borrow the words of a good friend of mine, safety is a fundamental human right, but policing is not safety. So when you vote on the budget, you are voting for safety. But I want you to ask yourselves, whose safety are you voting for? Will you continue the long history of colonialism and white supremacy in this country by using violence to protect white people and their interests? Or will you take action to provide safety for all in this community, especially those marginalized by the harmful systems in place around us? You as a leader has a decision to make. I ask you either listen to the countless community voices calling for actions like Reallocate Waterloo Region, or get out of the way, let others lead in this region in a direction that serves all of its residents. That is all.
Thank you, Justin. I'm now looking for Greg. Greg Thornton. Are you there, Greg?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to. There we go.
Perfect. You have 5
Okay.
minutes, Greg.
Okay. So I'm speaking from personal experience, but I just wanted to mention another incident because of all the other delegations I've been hearing. April 2nd, 2015, Bo Baker was shot and killed. This was the police response to a mental health crisis. Brian Larkin's comments in response to that shooting was that his officers are trained in de-escalation. I took a copy of that newspaper. I circled the word de-escalation. I left a copy of that newspaper between the statue up at North Division, between the legs of the lion and lamb statue, to show that the blood of Bo Baker is on the hands of Waterloo Regional Police. The inquest has still not been heard. The police were trying to hide the name of the member of their force that pulled the trigger, and that request was denied by a judge, but we still haven't had that resolved. The simple syrup that I poured on that statue was a protest. I was charged with a crime. The officer who pulled the trigger was not. That's a travesty, but I don't want to get too off topic here because we are talking about budget. So, in 2014, Waterloo Regional Police Service had a $3.4 million surplus attributed to maternity, paternity, retirement, and resignations, in addition to cutting down on overtime. Festive programs use officers who are paid overtime. In 2017, there was an article about how there were 19 programs versus in 2016, 45 programs. So a significant reduction. 82% less vehicles were stopped, and there was a 7.5% reduction in sobriety tests. That was after an increase. Larkin is now asking for another $12 million to have another 35 officers added to, and this is following another $45 million being spent to build a new police station. Joe Steiner, Director of Finance for Waterloo Regional Police Service back in 2015, said the $3.4 surplus they had in 2014 exceeded 1,600 weeks of employment. So if you divide that 1,600 weeks of employment by 52 weeks, that works out to roughly 30 employees. You'd be looking at, for the cost of the 3.4 million. So we're looking at 3 times that for an extra 5 guys or girls. Larkin's salary is $330,000. $330,811. In comparison, the Prime Minister's $365,200 a year salary is actually a combination of an MP salary and a base PM salary. The proposed budget of $197.8 million is a third of the region's entire operating budget, and that would be another increase, right? So we've been seeing increases hand over fist year after year since that surplus. Okay, so the 7.49% increase from 2019 to 2020 was 50% more than the budget increase from 2018 to 2019, and more than double the average increase from 2014 to 2018. So we're not just talking about, look at last year, how much they've got during the pandemic. I'm saying, look at how much of an increase we've seen over the last 8 years. They need to work with what they've got. We're in the middle of a global pandemic and economic turndown.
Greg.
Thank you. Economic turndown has cost many taxpayers not only wages, but jobs and some businesses. It is institutional and cultural arrogance to ask for yet another increase considering the current state of affairs. If anybody's interested in the reason that I have post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of police response, that can be found in the Routledge International Handbook of Interactionism, Chapter 18, Handling Video of Police Violence, Theoretical versus Practical Analysis. That was written by a criminology professor at the university, Wilfrid Laurier University. And I hope that textbook is able to help criminology students understand how police violence does affect, vulnerable sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now looking for Blair Corbett, please. Blair, are you there? Hi, Blair. You have 5 minutes. Please begin.
Thank you. Hey, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to speak about the budget increase of $12.4 million requested by Waterloo Regional Police Services. The police have admitted they cannot do the jobs they're being tasked with and come forward with yet another request to increase their budget. In this time of scarcity with social services in dire need, can we afford to invest further in punitive measures? Is that the kind of region we want to be? We cannot continue to throw further money at the police and expect they will suddenly be able to produce different results. They have proven time and again they are incapable of providing the solutions and support our communities need to live safe and healthy lives. We can see this in what Chief Larkin deems the, quote, world-class approach our police have to intimate partner violence, one which they admit has done nothing to reduce the amount of incidents reported. They claim they need this money to deal with increasing crime rates, but it is a proven fact that increasing police budgets does not decrease crime. We need to reinvest this money in services which deal with the root issues of crime, services which provide healing to our citizens rather than harm. There are any number of crises our region should be addressing right now. The amount of unhoused folks in the region has significantly increased over the last 3 years. We're in the midst of an ongoing opioid crisis and are currently dealing with a tainted supply, which has caused multiple spikes in overdoses over the last couple of months. Domestic violence is increasing in severity and complexity. Mental health supports are dire, with only 3 to 4 psychiatrists who can work with youth at Grand River Hospital and over 3,500 people on a wait list for treatment. It can take a young person as long as a year to receive the mental health support they need if they are unable to pay for private care. Meanwhile, the police are the only service we have available to respond to mental health crises 24/7. In August, when they were split from a young black man in crisis by shooting him. This is not the kind of help we need. The amount of money the police are requesting for a budget increase is comparable to the House of Friendship's entire operational budget of $15 million, And yet, in a time of unprecedented homelessness, House of Friendship lacks the resources necessary to provide a smooth transition from their current location to their new location, and was forced to close their doors for the first time in 82 years. We should be talking about the 100 men being forced onto the street due to this closure, not talking about the 25 additional policemen Chief Larkin wants to put on our streets. This money should be allocated to address the housing crisis our region is currently experiencing. We don't need to give the cops more money to criminalize and stigmatize the unhoused, as they did when they assisted in the eviction and bulldozing of the encampment on Charles and Sterling. We need to invest in non-police community care initiatives, as the region has promised, which can provide non-violent solutions by individuals who are trained in de-escalation, problem solving, and communication, rather than police, who receive far more education in how to handle a firearm than how to handle an interaction with a troubled human being. The largest amount of police resources are expended on mental health and drug use. If we removed these areas from police oversight and instead funded services which were capable of addressing these issues in a healthy and nonviolent way, perhaps that would free up the resources the police are looking for. I don't say this because I feel that the police are a helpful service that is simply focusing their efforts on the wrong problems. I don't believe the police benefit our community at all. My point is simply that there is no excuse to approve this bus. Chief Larkin said we need a refresh as a region on crime reduction and on crime strategies. Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. We need to invest in forward-thinking, progressive strategies that partner with social services to treat the roots of crime, which lie in social inequity. Further investment in policing will accomplish nothing. When Reallocate Waterloo Region polled citizens asking where they would choose to invest money in Waterloo Region, 95% of respondents chose to invest the money in community services rather than policing. So I am not alone when I urge the chair and regional council to reject the police budget increase and allocate this money towards services which will truly serve the people of this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Nina Deeb, are you there? Nina? Looking for Nina?
I'm here.
Perfect. You have 5 minutes. Please begin, Nina.
Thank you. I'd like to speak to the budget in general. I've said a 6.1% increase in the taxes is unacceptable. My property taxes since 2016 have increased by $1,044. This is a 14.27% increase. I would also like to speak to the police budget. Waterloo Regional Police budget, the increase that they have asked for, I would like to reject. I would like to ask that the police budget be rejected and that no increase be permitted. The police were on the wrong side of the law on November 26th. I was very disappointed to see our police force did not defend the victims when Waterloo Region and Waterloo Regional Police approached a homeless encampment, people with nothing, with a front loader. The disappointment to see this in my community is it's just devastating. The authority of the law will suffer if members of society aren't treated justly and decently. Evicting propertyless individuals from the outside is unacceptable. Where do you go from the outside? If you cannot exist in any place at all, where are you allowed to exist? You cannot police people out of poverty. Laws against property are laws against prosperity. The housing and homelessness budget of $152 million. I am not happy about this. I do not think that throwing more money at a problem is the result, is going to give us the outcome that we're looking for. For this amount of money, I see here that they're looking to add 2,500 units over between 2021 and 2025. I'd like to see more clarity on that because that's actually less than what we're building right now, just to be clear. And everyone has a noble reason to access the public purse. As a shareholder, I would rather have a housing product than a housing service. I'd like to have for my tax dollars to show where my tax dollars have gone. I want housing units, not housing services. The service system is the new product and the home should be the product. I would also like to point out that development charges have increased by 830% since 1996. Development charges used to be $6,610 and now they're over $54,000. This is a direct government cost and it is added to the cost of our housing by regulation. 11%, approximately 11% of tenants are in arrears in their rent. The HST on my neighbor's home was over $140,000, which is more than I paid for my first home, and I'm only in my 40s. That is how far housing has gone by the wayside. I would also like to point out that values cannot be separated from those who are to be benefited by them, which in this situation, we are throwing a lot of money at the housing problem, but the housing problem comes right down to the fact that there are no courts to protect private property. This is done by social justice tribunals. There are no courts anywhere to provide for private property rights. Private property rights provide the proper limits against those who would fail to act responsibly. A human being possesses the personal authority. The right to private property is a basic principle of our social existence. Capitalism is based on a theory of inalienable individual rights to life, liberty,
Just a minute
and
left,
property.
Nina.
Under a capitalist system, when problems arise, courts should be available to adjudicate, to enforce property rights. This is not what we have here in Canada. We have social justice tribunals to adjudicate. We do not have courts, so that our government has not provided courts for us to protect private property rights. Property rights guarantee freedom. Canada's written constitution contains no private property rights provision. This is clearly not good for our housing system. We need property rights. And I can't even speak to more policemen will not fix what we have here. We need to go back to having property rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Daniel Brotherston, are you there? Daniel?
Hello, yes.
Hi, Daniel. You have 5 minutes. Please begin.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and Council. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Queen's Place Condominium Corporation to express our concerns regarding the decision to remove the garbage collection rebate for multi-residential buildings. We feel this is a poor decision for several reasons, which we will outline. While our membership obviously benefits directly from this rebate, as do those of most other condo corporations around the region, we wish to take a broader view of the effects of this decision. First and foremost, who does this decision affect? While our membership are homeowners who are affected, the majority of homeowners in the region own single-family homes, semi-detached homes, or other freehold properties, which do receive municipal garbage collection. On the other hand, the majority of rental apartments in the city are mid-size or larger apartment buildings or large townhouse developments, which do not receive municipal garbage collection. Further, renters are more likely to be lower income and almost universally have lower wealth than homeowners. By region census data, renters are significantly more likely to be experiencing unaffordable housing, spending more than 30% of their income than those who own their homes. The net effect of these two statistics is that this change represents a significant transfer of costs from wealthier homeowners to poorer renters. While one may argue that landlords could absorb this cost, landlords are running a business and generally transfer those costs to tenants, their tenants. Further, because of this effectively increases taxes, it may qualify this year's tax increase as extraordinary under the Tenancy Act, permitting landlords to increase rent above the legislated amount. This transfer of costs is counterproductive to the region's goals of improving housing, affordability, and reducing precarious housing in our community. It is also simply unfair to ask poorer renters to pay more such that wealthier homeowners pay less. Secondly, we must look at what this change incentivizes. This change will have the effect of increasing the cost of denser developments in order to further subsidize the cost of sprawling suburban developments. It is already the case that denser developments heavily subsidize suburban sprawl. This increases that subsidy. This is directly contrary to the region's strategic goals of intensification, environmental sustainability, and fiscal responsibility. We should not be increasing the subsidy for unsustainable forms of development. This is a short-sighted choice that will only make our community less affordable and less sustainable moving forward. In summary, while this change provides short-term budgetary relief to the region, it harms lower-income renters and our region's future sustainability. It's a poor decision, and we urge you to reconsider it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now looking for Sarah Pearson. Sarah, are you there? Wonderful.
Yes, I am.
You have 5 minutes. Please begin.
Thank you. And thank you to all the other delegations who've spoken tonight, particularly relating to the police budget and the need to reallocate those funds. I'm speaking tonight about the $40 million the region has pledged for the expansion of the Waterloo Region Airport. The region has declared a climate emergency, and we have pledged to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030. Now, the IPCC report in the summer made it abundantly clear we need to reduce emissions now, drastically, urgently. Code red for humanity was the quote that was used in all of the major newspapers I was reading. I'm not here though tonight to repeat science because I'm not a climate scientist, I'm not an expert, and I'm assuming that everyone here is somewhat up to date on the news because we're all here at a regional council meeting. So we know enough to know the basics of the science, like where this isn't news to us. So I'm hoping to speak just personally to the common sense aspect of what it means to build and expand an airport when we've declared a climate emergency. And simply put, it makes no sense to build infrastructure for high fossil fuel emitting initiatives. It makes no sense to expand an airport in a climate emergency. So when I started to look into how the region could approve this airport expansion while still committing to its targets, or at the very least posturing that we were committing to them, I learned that emissions from airports in Canada actually get counted at the federal level, so not regional. So there's a loophole. And Waterloo Region can sneak in some bonus emissions while still engaging in the rhetoric and the publicity about being committed to climate justice and climate action. But this transactional approach to emissions, this idea that emissions are some kind of legal tender that we can swap and trade around, it's unfortunately not how climate science works. We don't get to borrow someone else's emissions. We share emissions and they are killing us. So since there is a loophole that will, allow this expansion to go through and it's all kosher and Waterloo Region doesn't have to get a slap on the wrist for increasing their emissions, since those are going to be counted federally, I'm just once again going to appeal to common sense, or maybe even to the hearts, the emotions of councillors. It is delusional to expand an airport and encourage more air travel. We cannot build more of this into this world. And I want to be very clear that I'm not speaking tonight as an eco-warrior. I am not holier than thou. I live pretty much in the same delusion. I ate industrial meat for breakfast today. In August, I took a 3-week vacation to Italy. I didn't paddle a canoe there, I flew. Part of me is really excited for this airport expansion to happen because I have 2 aging parents in Montreal, and to be able to hop on a local flight, be in Montreal in an hour if I needed to, in many ways would mean the world to me. It's really a shame that those funds aren't being proposed for the high-speed train that has been talked about for decades, but that's a whole other budget, and that's not what we're talking about tonight. But when I really let this sink in, that the region is expanding the airport despite declaring a climate emergency and setting targets, it feels devastating. The pain is actually almost unbearable because I realize that this means that you've given up, that we're not trying. That, yeah, sure, we'll keep flying to climate summits every few years and make big banner statements about reducing emissions and then carry on business as usual because it's too existentially immense, too traumatic to process, to accept the fact that business as usual is destroying the world as we know it. The grief is immense, but building more infrastructure for the highest emitting form of travel is delusional. When the CBC asked regional officials about how the airport expansion fits into climate action, the answer was that Flair has got brand new airplanes which are operating a much more efficient use of energy. And frankly, that is offensive greenwashing. That is not how this works. When cars got more fuel efficient, we just saw bigger cars on the road. And Pearson Airport is honestly not that far. It's closer from here to get to Pearson than it is to get to Charles de Gaulle Airport from a lot of parts of Paris. Our local airport that we currently have is a luxury. It's not a necessity. When we make air travel easier to access, more people will do it. And encouraging a world where people fly more is delusional. So please do not expand our airport. Please invest this money in low emission transit and in climate activism. It is painful. The grief is
Sarah,
a
I'm going to
mess.
ask you to wrap up, please. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. Much appreciated. I'm now looking for Tom Hapanen. Tom, are you there?
I am here.
You have 5 minutes. Please begin.
Hi, Chair, Councillors. I'm here on the behalf of the owners and tenants at Aero Lofts to express our concern about your intention to discontinue the multi-residential garbage rebate. Multi-residential buildings, whether they're condominiums or rental apartments, are key to the regions and the city's plans to increase intensity and prevent further suburban sprawl into the farmlands and the green areas that are surrounding our cities. This is, as I understand it, this is the focus of the region, is to increase intensity. The multi-residential buildings already impose a lighter load on regional and city services than suburban single-family homes do due to their compact nature, and other services such as green bin collection are not even provided to such buildings. In addition, even today, the regional rebate does not even come close to covering the cost of garbage collection in a typical multi-residential building. In our building, it covers about 40% of the cost of collecting garbage from the units in our building. Removing this rebate from the budget is not only unfair to residents living in multi-residential buildings, it's also disproportionately large. It also has a disproportionately large impact on renters, lower income residents, and those in affordable housing, all of whom are more likely to be living in multi-residential buildings. While this change would only be applied to property owners through the rebate, it would certainly end up impacting the tenants as well, as landlords do, as a rule, pass their cost increases on to tenants, whether those landlords are for-profit corporations, individual condo investors, or non-profit organizations. Kitchener Housing, for example, would lose this rebate for most of its 1,500 affordable housing residents, increasing the cost of Kitchener Housing, which would either offload the costs in the city of Kitchener or increase the rents for those residents. Worse yet, arguably this is a tax increase and would exempt the landlord from the rent control limits for 2022, immediately allowing landlords to immediately increase the rents on tenants. In summary, the removal of the garbage rebate is not only counter to the region's stated goal of intensification, but it would also unfairly impact lower income residents living in multi-residential buildings. Should this budget gap need to be closed, the region should most reasonably spread this cost increase across all properties through the region rather than singling out multi-residential buildings. Thank you.
Much appreciated. I'm now looking for Henriette Thompson and coordinating team and Ron Hillier. I think that's everyone. Are you there?
Yes, we're here. Thank you very much.
You have 10 minutes.
Good evening, Chair Redmond and members of Region of Waterloo Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Ron Hiller and I are here to speak to you on behalf of Faith Climate Justice Waterloo Region, a network of faith communities focusing on climate justice, and that emerged in late 2019. Sorry, I'm just looking how to. Next slide, please. Thank you. We currently represent faith communities from Jewish, Hindu, Christian, and Universalist traditions. We continue to grow and welcome members of all faiths and people of goodwill. Faith Climate Justice also appreciates the active participation of Interfaith Grand River and Christians Together Waterloo Region. So we reach close to an estimated 200 individuals on email, and they themselves are connected to small and large faith communities in Waterloo Region. And this means that we therefore engage several thousand people in the work of gathering faith communities around climate justice issues. We advocate for a sustainable, low carbon economy that generates prosperity for all. And so we strive to ensure that no one is left behind or on the sidelines. Next slide, please. Faith Climate Justice is active in the following ways. We host open dialogues on faith leadership for climate justice. We've had 3 in the last 18 months. A growing number of faith communities, approximately at least a dozen now, are displaying 4 by 10 foot climate justice banners that have been designed by 2 local designers, Heather Lee and Abid Duan, on faith community buildings and properties in the region. The banner design is actually replicated in this slide presentation. We animate our work through several working groups, and we support new participants in hosting worship services and starting new dialogues. And then the final thing that we do that's most important to us is that we engage municipal councils, which is why we are here today. This past spring, we presented to Regional Council, and we encouraged you to adopt Transform WR Climate Plan and the 50 by 30 campaign targets for greenhouse gas emissions. We deeply appreciate the adoption of these climate targets by Regional Council and by all 8 municipalities. Now, today you are holding final consultations on the region's 2022 plan and budget regarding the implementation of these climate goals, and we wish to make 2 points for your consideration. The first is that Faith Climate Justice urges Council to take bold steps to refresh the 2019 to 2023 strategic plan focus on environment and climate action, and to engage other levels of government to be able to implement measures that will boost the region's ability to reach Transform WR and 50 by 30 targets. And the second point for your consideration is that the future of the climate crisis is here now. We recoiled at the destructive heat or the destructive power of the heat dome that produced daily temperatures of over 40 degrees in BC and led to suffering and death this summer. We witnessed the power of an atmospheric river that took lives, destroyed infrastructure and livelihoods, and we continue to witness to the ongoing effects of the melting permafrost in the Arctic on its people and on the land, water, and the air. In all these situations, faith communities play an important role in community preparedness, response, and recovery. Many examples have been shared in excellent webinars on citizens and emergency preparedness, hosted by the Tamarack Institute and Vibrant Communities, and in case studies by Faith and the Common Good. Sorry. And also, we'd like to mention the fact that in this region, we are we have these amazing academic researchers, people who are doing postdoctoral research, for example, on community involvement in responding to climate crises. And they are also feeding into the operational and policy dimensions of community disaster preparedness. Now, one of the region's strategic plan actions is 3.2.3, which reads, to develop a climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessment to review local climate projections, current and projected health risks, and identify adaptive measures to strengthen resilience to the health impacts of climate change. As you review the strategic plan approximately halfway through the term of Council in early 2022, we ask you to consider if there might be a place to engage faith communities to help strengthen climate disaster preparedness, response, and recovery across the region. As the Tamarack Institute notes in its case study on strengthening the role of faith-based organizations, faith groups can add great value to local emergency response structures and systems. Many of them already serve their most vulnerable neighbors through regular drop-in or meal programs. Others provide overnight shelter. And faith groups offer local community connections, volunteer mobilization, and locally relevant resources that can enhance response and recovery effectiveness. So we'd like to leave that to you for further consideration. What is the role that you see that faith communities may be able to contribute to in the work around environment and climate action? And so I'd now like to ask Ron Hiller to offer some concluding reflections.
Yes, hello?
Hello, Ron. We can hear you.
Okay. Yes, we certainly do want to thank you for saying yes to the Transform Waterloo Region strategy and for adopting the goal of 50 by 30. We're here today to affirm our support for you in your efforts to successfully implement these strategies. And now a bit about the personal journey that brings me here. I'm a very musical guy. After graduating from Teachers College in 1989, I chose to combine my strong music background with my teacher training to become children's singer-songwriter Rono. Soon I was presenting my songs, some of them being environmental songs, in schools all over Ontario, including over the years in the great majority of Region of Waterloo elementary schools. That's what began for me in 1989. And now here we are, almost a third of a century later. And where are we at? Some progress has been made in caring for our environment, but sadly not enough. We haven't kept up. And now we've got a climate crisis and related problems that are more urgent than ever. The years have passed so quickly. The coming years will also pass quickly. We must be acting urgently and boldly now. The trade-off for not doing so is just too great. A tragedy, really, considering what has been lost already and what we risk losing.
1 minute left, Ron.
And yes, sacrifice will be needed to respond appropriately and get the job done. My parents and all their siblings, all growing up in this region, knew about sacrifice. First being raised in the Depression and then sacrificing, serving and tightening their belts through World War II. And now it's our turn. It's our great challenge. Admittedly, such sacrifice and tough choices will not be popular with everyone, but you can count on faith communities to be supportive and to stay engaged in the work of climate justice for the long haul. We'll be paying attention and we'll be there to encourage you, our regional government representatives to implement the increased climate targets of Transform Waterloo Region and 50 by 30. We deeply appreciate all your efforts. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ron. I'm looking for Ashay Dalvey. I hope I've said that correctly. Ashay, are you there? Are you in the waiting room?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. You have 5 minutes. Please begin.
Good evening. The words police and violence go hand in hand. Police have violently inflicted harm on individuals marginalized and disenfranchised for decades. When I first moved to Canada about 4 years ago, I was in a place where I had to face tremendous amount of racism and white supremacy and still do so. I had to go through a dark time where I was a victim of violence. I decided to report that to the police. I walked into a police station and I was scared and vulnerable and terrified and frightened. And at the door of the police station, I was violently told to stop right there and answer every question. I was at the door. I was told that I will be arrested. I will be taken in if I refuse to answer a police officer's questions. And I am here scared and vulnerable and frightened because I want to report a violence that was inflicted on me. How am I supposed to report a crime when the people I'm reporting to are violent themselves? Police exist to inflict fear, and the police violently inflict fear. Board increased police powers last year. I was terrified to walk to work by myself. Since I moved to Kitchener-Waterloo last year, racism and white supremacy have devoured my existence. This year, I volunteered to be the media relations executive for the anti-racism rally. At the rally, there were 5 police vehicles present. The Waterloo Region Police Service took video footage of the people attending, people who attended with their children. The police recorded them without their consent. That is an act of violence. I am here to speak in favor of reallocating money from the police budget and directing it towards police-free community services. I would like to endorse the calls to action put forward by Reallocate WR, which you all have received. I want to highlight one that asks the region to immediately fulfill its commitment of $250,000 to facilitate community conversations and subsequent action plans for a police-free community care model. Another ask I want to focus on is committing $1 million towards funding mental health and neurodevelopmental resources and services for IBPOC, 2S LGBTQIA persons living with disabilities and other communities impacted by the trauma of police violence. As a human being in a brown body, in a place where I am considered a minority, I have had to endure racism on a daily basis. As that human being, I used my voice to speak out against racism, but I was not allowed to. I wrote about my encounter with racism on Facebook. A screenshot of that Facebook post was used as evidence against me by the Waterloo Region Police Force. As a human being who used their voice to speak out against racism, I paid the price for it, literally. To those reading this, racism and white supremacy is a public health crisis and should be regarded as such.
1 minute warning.
So much harm caused by the Waterloo Region Police Service because so much fear and hatred exists. I have a voice and I am not allowed to have it, and the police ensures that I'm allowed to use it. As a human being in a brown body, I have to endure oppression and endure it in silence. To fund police is to inflict violence. To fund police is to maintain white supremacy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm looking for Ruth. Ruth Cameron. Ruth, are you in the Zoom room?
I am.
Wonderful. You have 5 minutes, Ruth. Please begin.
Thank you. Good evening to members of Regional Council. My name is Ruth Cameron. I'm the Executive Director of AQUA, the AIDS Committee of Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo, and area. I'm a member of the ACB Network, the Rainbow Community Council, and a community-based health researcher who focuses on health interventions. AQUA provides multiple care clinics, health promotion and disease prevention programs to key populations at heightened risk for HIV, hepatitis C, and disease prevention programs to key populations who are affected by sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections and drug poisoning via the opioid overdose epidemic. We engage with 5,000 unique individuals a year and 18 to 20,000 interactions. These individuals are from communities made vulnerable to severe morbidity and premature mortality due to the social determinants of health. Social determinants of health are structures that play a large role in shaping our health outcomes, far more than an individual's genetic makeup or individual decisions, choices, and practices. I'm here to provide actual evidence and guidance on potential life-saving budgetary allocations that can alleviate the disproportionate burden and impact for several separate concurrent epidemics that I address through my primary, secondary, and tertiary disease and injury prevention and health promotion work at AQUA. These epidemics include the epidemic of anti-Black racism and the attendant disproportionate death, illness, injury, police surveillance, police violence, underemployment, unemployment, incarceration, and poverty ongoing in what is now called Canada since 1608 for Black communities. The ongoing HIV epidemic and its devastating impact on Indigenous, Black, and gay communities, and on people who inject drugs, and the epidemic which has been complicated by a 25% drop in HIV testing during the COVID pandemic. Along with this, there's the opioid overdose epidemic. A health emergency so far reaching life expectancy in Canada has ceased to increase year over year for the first time in 4 decades. We also see a 58% increase in deaths related to opioids and poison drugs in our region in the last year, and the ongoing COVID pandemic disproportionately impacting many of the same communities in terms of subsequent disability and death. Accompanying all of these public health crises is a tripling of homelessness in our region. I want to emphasize that housing is a social determinant of health. There are several connections between these epidemics, the communities, and the interventions used against the communities that I've listed above. These communities can be defined by commonalities in an experience defined by marginalization through decisions made by policymakers. Barriers to health equity experienced by these communities is due to being defined as a problem by decision makers who have defunded their lives through taking resources from community health and social services and solely funded police and introduced policing and subsequent criminalization as the only health intervention for their COVID vaccination, acute mental health, disability support, affordable housing, substance use, trauma-informed care, income support, anti-racism, anti-transphobia, anti-homophobia, anti-oppression, and social isolation-related needs. When policing worsens the severity of harm and disparity related to these needs. In the summer of 2020, the ACB network demanded that police stop surveilling, harassing, injuring, and killing us. We demanded an end to year-over-year increases in police resourcing that results in our deaths and the deaths of our Indigenous kin. Police have responded by claiming they do the work of our neighbors who brought soup, tarps, blankets, and recognition to residents who are homeless and who are living on the corner of Charles and Sterling. Police claim they deliver mental health, social, and community services. They claim that they work with healthcare systems.
1 minute left, Ruth.
Police break up encampments and fragment homeless communities, separating people from the resources and the naloxone that keep them safe and exposing them to potential injury or death. We're resourcing police during a global pandemic while we continue the 30-year defunding of community health and social services. Community has to take evidence from the actual health and safety crisis occurring in our community to make an evidence-informed decision for the most resource residents during this ongoing health crisis. Please support Reallocate Waterloo Region's calls for 0% increase to the police budget and fund the services and supports that are creating genuine safety, health, and well-being in our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm looking for Marina. Marina, are you there? Are you in the Zoom room? There you are, Marina.
I'm here.
Welcome. You have 5 minutes. Please begin.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties. My mouse is being a little weird. Sorry. Okay. So my name is Marina Josic. I'm here to talk about the proposed increase to the police budget. I am an emotional person, so I wrote out an objective script. I've decided to scrap that script since I've been watching this meeting happen. I think that too often emotions are left out of politics. Yes, it's important to be logical in decision making. At the same time, emotions are important. Emotions are an integral part of the human experience and a key component of holistic decision making. I am sad, angry, anxious, frustrated. I feel helpless, hopeful, and everything in between. As I sit in this Zoom call full of privileged white people, I am painfully conscious of the fact that my emotions, thoughts, and words hold more weight because I am white and educated, because I come from an upper middle class upbringing, and because I am a well-behaved, mentally ill person. I could spit countless numbers and facts at you, but I believe the folks who have gone before me have articulated the objective piece as well. We are told police are supposed to help. The motto of our region's police is people helping people. When you look at the objective pieces, it is painfully obvious that police do not help. They have never helped anyone except those living in power and privilege. From their colonialist, genocidal inception to their phony current status as community helpers, police have never been there to help. As has been made apparent, the police hurt instead of help. Part of being an emotional human is feeling empathy. How can you listen to the pain that people communicate to you and not feel for them? Empathy is an emotional state that calls us to action. It is apparent that an increase to the police budget would increase community and individual harm. Allocating that money elsewhere is an action that you can take to support the well-being of others. Honor your empathy. Government bodies are also supposed to help. Counselors, are you not supposed to be serving your community? Your community is telling you that you are not serving them. The people present have provided countless ideas for reallocation of the police budget. Will you please help us make this community better? Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. I'm now looking for Kevin Thomason. Kevin, are you there? Kevin? Okay. Hello, Kevin.
Yep.
So you have 3 minutes. Please begin.
Good evening. I only have 3 minutes, and I'm sure you're tired after a long meeting. I'm Kevin Thomason from 1115 Cedar Grove Road at Sunfish Lake. Most of you are familiar with my decades of environmental and sustainability work. I'd like to speak tonight in support of the deferral of the construction of the River Road extension. As you know, this road construction, the threat it poses to Hidden Valley Natural Area, and the amazing rare creatures such as the Jefferson salamanders living right here in the center of our region is something that local citizens and environmentalists have fought for years. Only area developers celebrated the very concerning 2014 road approval. Not only will the deferral of this road construction save tens of millions of dollars, but each month that passes allows more time for these rare creatures to live and a long-term sustainability plan for this jewel of Hidden Valley to be found. You've already heard at earlier budget meetings from dedicated citizens like Gord Nichols and Neil Taylor, who have spent years of their lives speaking up for many of the most threatened natural areas of our region. The public is expecting our governments to do more to protect nature, to restore balance, and to address our climate crisis right now. 2030 is only 100 months away. Our youth are saying no more blah, blah, blah. Deferring this destructive, very expensive, and unneeded road, as regional staff are recommending, is an important immediate action that you can take in this upcoming budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And time to spare. Well done. Looking for Isaac Horvath. Isaac, are you in the Zoom room?
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Isaac? Are you there? Julie, are you able to see Isaac in there? No. Okay, so Isaac's not in the Zoom room, so, and there's no new delegates. So going once, going twice. Okay, looking for the motion, the big one. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry, not quite yet. Not quite yet. Sorry about that, you guys. So we have a number of pieces of correspondence that were received, including the agenda. Anything that was received by clerk's office after the meeting agenda was circulated, were given to us by email prior to the meeting and will be attached to the minutes. And they're listed there. Is there any other business? No. Okay. I am looking for that motion to adjourn now. I think Councillor Kiefer had his hand up and Councillor Nowak. All those in favor, please use your green buttons. And that's carried. Thanks, everybody, for your patience for a long evening. We'll talk again soon. Bye.